Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special meeting of the Town of Richmond Select Board. This being Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. I am on call tonight, so if I beep, I'll have to step aside, and our vice chair, Lisa Miller, cannot take over, so I'm sure Josh Bard and Jay could handle it if that happens, but it probably won't. Before we begin, I just want to give a shout out to our local Catamounts. Yay! Awesome game last night. We had something else going on last night, so we missed it, but the recaps were pretty exciting.
You know if they have shirts and stuff on sale yet?
Oh, I'm sure they will.
I was like, do I want to drive to Burlington just to get a shirt? But
I'm not sure they pre-ordered them.
Nobody goes to Burlington anymore. It's too
Yeah.
crowded. Okay, before we begin, would anybody care to make a public comment? Hard.
This is sort of public comment, select board member comment. Thinking about our conversation last night with Marilee from Heinsberg, it struck me that it might be useful, given our history, current state and future state, to have like quarterly communications or joint meetings, some kind of ongoing meeting between us and them.
Yeah,
And I think that's a future agenda item, but I just wanted to mention it before I forget it.
yeah, it's gotten mentioned a few times. It's not a bad idea.
we should probably build into select board meetings at least quarterly updates. Check in on our neighbors.
What's working, what's not working, how you feeling about
I'm sure
it?
they haven't been abducted by aliens.
Bring them a pie, invite them over for coffee. Maybe change views. No, it's a good idea. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Sorry. I
Okay.
was late.
No worries.
You know, if Mr. Chairman here has to go out on call because he hasn't called tonight, you have to chair.
Oh, okay.
No pressure.
Good that I'm here. Want me to hold the pager for you?
That would be better.
I don't think I get help from your profession.
Josh Words, Connie, any additions, deletions, or modifications to tonight's agenda? Okay, let's jump right in and review the draft fiscal year 26 budget.
We'll start with an overview.
Sure.
Share screen.
Oh, Adam is here.
Yeah, he, I
He's
think
just not
last
here.
night he mentioned he was gonna be remote.
And for those of us viewing from home, which, are we viewing one of the attachments online, or is this a modification of what was posted?
So yeah, this is a slight modification of the budget that was posted online, and I'll explain here in a minute. I'm just gonna see if I can make this a little bigger. Why is that being so weird? There we go. That might be a little better for people at home to follow along. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few things on the budget. As I mentioned, this is slightly different than what we had in the packet, and I'll explain why here as I review. So the first biggest change is as we've been looking at different staffing iterations and staffing potential changes, as Connie and I were looking at this budget at the end of last week, we figured the best way to kind of look at additions of staffing or change in staffing levels is to start each department, and it's mostly just town administration and police, with where we're currently budgeted for FY25 and what that would look like if we rolled into 26. So in admin, that means we've reverted all these numbers and they affect the salaries, the social security, the childcare contribution tax, and municipal retirement. So in admin, we've reset this to be a 30-hour per week assistant to the town manager with a 2-person opt-out of health insurance. In police, we've reset that to be 4 full-time officers, a contracted chief split with Heinsberg, and a 20-hour per week administrative assistant. So we sort of tried to flatline, start from there and build our changes off of that. In the past, we were trying to like start with our wish list and then add some changes down in the bottom. That got extremely complicated, so we went with this route. So those changes, as I said, affect salary, social security, Medicare, childcare, and contribution tax. I'm going to get to a little bit more of the staffing in a bit, but I also want to kind of pivot now and say, as we were reviewing this budget last week, We looked at a few things that we needed to make some changes with, and I kind of want to preface this by saying like, this is a very unique budget year. Every year has its own unique wrinkles and challenges. This one with the flood in July that is nearing $2 million of expenses, and then trying to recover from last year's flood and get money in from that flood financially. We're doing our best to try to keep up with things that are ever changing. And some of that also involves looking at what reserve funds can we use in this year to pay for current flood expenses? What can we reduce in the budget? So I feel like sometimes we'll go back into the budget and go, oh, we didn't do that, or we should consider this. So some of this is updates that we found last week that we'll explain through this budget. So,
right.
yep, you know,
Well, just, to pause for a moment on that 2 million sort of accounts receivable or ostensibly receivable from FEMA, which from our standards is a lot of money. And coupled with the direction we receive from our attorney, that you can't borrow money if you have money. So essentially, we've had to liquidate the money that's available to cover that, including things like vacancy savings that in other previous years would have been used to offset tax increases in the following years. So sort of if you have money left, you use it to buy down the next year's taxes. But that we don't have that advantage this year, even though there were vacancy savings. Is it fair to say they go to pay for these things we have to pay for and are thus not available to buy down the next year's taxes and tax rate?
Yes, absolutely. And so as we go in, and so a couple of these changes were from last meeting. So in the last meeting, we had talked about reducing the contribution to transportation planning line from 10,000 to 5,000. In last meeting, we said, oh, we can probably reduce it to 2,500. So we're still using the salmon line here to talk about what will change on that line. So that is an additional $2,500, which will save $7,500 over what was initially proposed.
Okay.
In library, the library director noticed that we were budgeting for a 5-hour per week substitute, and she said that should be 3 hours per week. So that had some slight effect on salaries, Social Security, childcare contribution, and municipal retirement.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So that 3 hour per week position, is that an existing staff member? Is that paying for somebody to come in when they normally wouldn't, or is this a distinct person?
It's a substitute person, and what I did is I looked at their hours last year, and that came to an average of 3 rather than 5 hours per week.
Okay.
So just to expand on that, on Jay's question, David, then presumably what this means is for the library as well, we're looking at flat staffing.
I think there was a change
that
in
one?
staffing.
They moved 2 of their people last year, moved to 24 hours, so they went on Beamers.
But was that in last year's budget?
Don't know as though both of them were. I think it happened during the year,
I think so.
Last year, you mean?
fiscal year 24.
Is there anybody from the library here? I know that Suzanne couldn't join us here.
Lori is here.
Lori, I just muted you. Your line was getting a lot of feedback. Maybe you can speak to the staffing question on library. But you have to unmute yourself. Because there was some reverberation occurring.
I'm not sure what the question was because I just barely logged on.
Oh, sure, sorry. So the question was about library staffing and what's changed in this iteration of the budget for FY 26 from where we were budgeted in FY 20.
Been teaching ever since. You do both.
Okay.
Yeah.
We hired someone to fill Suzanne's position. And then we added a 12-hour a week clerical person to try to cover all the times where we were short-staffed.
Right.
So our conversation, to be clear here, Lori, was about what's our assumption for a budget that's flat staffing based on what we had budgeted before. And
Right.
from this, it sounds like it was a 1-person 12-hour a week increase. Not flat.
Correct.
So I'll just say what I have said before, that when times are difficult like now, And full disclosure, I'm informed or perhaps biased by my experience in state government. When you have a bad year, you don't add staff positions. And one of the other things I'll say that seems to be a general truth about adding staff is when you add staff, we are building our base budget
Remains.
until we eliminate that staff person. So even if you have cost savings, this is a classic. A person who's been around 10 or 20 or 30 years leaves and a new person comes in, you hire that person in that position and you pay them less, so you have savings for that position. At least in state government and the nonprofits that I've worked with, that money goes into other things. You don't use it to backfill additional staff because again, that builds your base budget. Because 5 or 10 years from now, both of those staff will have moved up the pay scales and you'll be paying more than you had intended.
So cover existing costs rather than adding some.
Existing
Right.
positions is really the concept. Again, I am biased or influenced by my experience as well in other sectors.
Correct. So, I have a hard time talking about all of the reasons why we added that 12-hour a week person. Basically, it was to cover staff times that we were short-staffed. And we've been filling that in with substitute staff, which we would like to not have to do. So that's why we added the other position. And it was added back, she was already hired, so she has been working. We hired her with the understanding that her job might end at the end of June. But I wish it would be easier to have Suzanne address this. Unfortunately, she has a family commitment tonight. So.
Well, so you've said
yeah.
two things. One, I would observe if you are already spending money on substitutes and we demonstrate that this position is a wash, so to speak, for
Right,
the substitute payments.
right,
I
right.
guess the question for Connie is if you can find where the substitute payments were and show that this is equal or roughly equal to that
Correct.
expenditure. In which case I could argue that it's flat staffing. And if not, then I
Right.
guess I'd conclude it's not flat staffing, it's an increase in staff.
Okay,
Does that make sense to other folks here?
yes,
My understanding is they were having an issue getting the subs to actually sub.
well, that is true too. I don't know how much we paid. I think it was Jennifer in the last fiscal year. It was Jennifer Sprague. And I don't know how much we paid her, Connie.
Were the people who were working as occasional subs, former staff who'd agreed to come in when the need arose, or what?
No, it was well, it was someone who had a regular job, but then decided she only wanted to do substitute work.
But then didn't come in when she was needed.
Well, or I think it was more that when they called her, she wasn't available.
So a person you can count on versus a person you can't.
Correct.
So I understand the logic,
Oh,
but
sure,
it sort
absolutely.
of conflicts with our principle of are we level staffing or not? So that's sort of how I've come to look at the budget.
Yeah,
That we should increase staffing with great caution under duress, like we have a real problem in, like, I don't know what we'd say, we have to close the library if we don't do this. So, and maybe you can't answer this, Lori, but I don't want to be unfair to the library, but I have sort of the same question across all of our departments. How do we view level staffing? And that if we're going to increase FTEs or paid hours, that it would seem to me if we're doing that, it's either base building, which I'm reluctant to do in a tight budget time, or it's offset by other hours. And
Right.
I distinguish that from the wages or benefits of an existing person.
And it's unclear whether the number of paid hours worked is flat, increased, or decreased. I understand different people
Correct.
are working the hours, but I guess I'm curious what the net hours, paid hours worked is.
Is it equal full-time?
And maybe we
person?
can't answer that now, but maybe
Yeah,
that's.
I don't
or-
have that number at my fingertips. I think we'd have to figure that out, but we could do that for you.
Okay.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense to you as sort of a question? And
Yes, I get the question. And Connie might have to, I don't know if Suzanne will know how many substitute hours we paid for. So she might have to
Okay.
consult with Connie on that.
And how those were reflected in the budget
It's the-
as well, like,
Yeah.
were they in the budget, or was it, we assumed like, oh, somebody doesn't work, somebody does work? Like, we're paying that hour to either primary or the secondary, but not both. Okay,
And essentially, the idea is not looking for a net increase in scheduled worked hours,
Okay,
or budgeted work hours, and again, the idea
Right.
of, here's an example, if somebody in highway doesn't use health insurance and we save $15,000,
Yep.
we don't go out and hire a part-time person for $15,000 because we save the money.
correct.
That's
No,
as
I
a-
get that. Yep, I'll have to work on this with Suzanne. I can get in touch with her and let her know what we need to do.
And yeah, I think stay in touch with Connie too, Connie's got some
Yeah,
good, that can help.
yeah.
Mhm.
And Suzanne might be on later. She just had a child's concert tonight, so she
Sure.
might be signing on at a later time.
Yeah, but it still might not be something that we can do in real time.
Well, yeah, I don't think we have
Maybe-
this
maybe-
this
or maybe Connie
specific
can add-
number.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. So what
Yeah.
I'm doing, I'm pulling up that employee count spreadsheet right now that we had. So
Mhm.
that showed in fiscal year 25, we had budgeted for two 32-hour position, well, actually, that's not correct. So we moved two people up to 24 hours triggering Beamers. So we had two 32-hour positions.
Yep.
And two positions that came up from 16 hours a week to 24 hours a week.
Correct.
And then
Uh,
4 of the 6
I don't
stayed
think,
at
I
16
think we
hours a
only
week.
moved one person up to 24.
I
No,
think
there's
we're gonna
2.
need- I think we're gonna need to do this offline.
Yeah,
Just
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because there's two, like, I think we need to get
Yep.
probably Lori, Connie, Suzanne, maybe myself to kind of really go through and see.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
Well, this conversation generated the task of knowing what to look for and knowing where to look. We know that.
Yep.
So,
no, it's also a good example of, as we sort of dig deeper, we find
Mhm.
new avenues to go down and figure out.
Connie, do we know if they are on budget for 24? I mean, going into the next year? Um,
25.
Josh actually
yeah, I mean,
has
well,
that.
going into 25. but-
Well, we don't have
So-
to.
So if you notice the Beamers line, we budgeted for 7,855 and our actual was 11,610. So that's where we're showing that
Hmm,
2 of those people that weren't on Beamers did get moved to Beamers during 24, but we did budget them for 25.
Oh, they were budgeted in 25. Okay.
Correct.
Which to
Mhm.
me is illustrative of, you bring on staff in the beginning, it's not so much, but over time, you get more hours, you get VEMRs, and suddenly
Mhm.
that person goes from
Mhm.
costing whatever, 30,000 to costing 60,000.
Mhm.
And that's the sort of creep, and why I think of adding staff as base building.
Mhm.
That's exactly, yeah, it starts.
Mhm.
Yeah, you have to realize that down the road, it's gonna be a much bigger commitment than may appear at first.
So sticking in library, speaking of Beamers, we also noted that as we reviewed the pay sheets, there's a slight increase in Beamers. There was one. Oh, there's Lori. There she goes.
What?
There was, I think, one. No, you're good, Lori. We just wanted you to mute because there's some background noise.
Yeah,
Great. It's not intro.
All right. There she goes. Okay,
Wheels are out around.
So there's a slight increase in the VEMR's line from library from last budget iteration, because we realized that we needed to add one person that was omitted on the previous iterations of the budget. Looking at highway, in addition to trying to respond to flooding in July and through the end of, well, November, early December, we had some staffing turnover in highway in October, well, September, and October, where we lost 3 staff members. Pete did a real good job of recruiting and getting new members in and making some internal changes. In those iterations, we captured some of those changes in the previous iteration of the budget, but as we took a harder look, we realized that we didn't capture all of those changes in the FY26 budget. So that actually is a decent up of 16,500 spread between regular salaries, Social Security, childcare contribution, and municipal retirement. And this isn't adding new staff. This is changes in the existing staff and having to pay a little bit more for attracting some new and actually fairly experienced staff. So that is a change from last iteration to this iteration. And then on the revenue side of the budget, this is a conversation from last meeting. We noted that this was, I think, budgeted for library electric vehicle charging station. This is sort of the offset to the expenses. We had that at 2,500 with the expenses at 5,000. So we've corrected that in this iteration. So those are the changes that are included in the budget that's in the packet. Then Connie and I were reviewing this yesterday morning and noted that, well, we just had another $65,000 warrant for flood expenses. That was the Hillview Road replacement, which I want to make sure I mentioned that the culvert, not the road replacement. Thank you. Pete and his crew did a really good job of doing that in-house. It could have been hundreds of thousands of dollars out of house. But we had $65,000 expense on that. And we said, well, the number that we used in unassigned funds over here, that this is our tracking of where do we end the year, where do we think we're going to end fiscal year 25. We pulled a real number of $1,770,000 in this line here. That did not include the $65,000. So we said, well, we got to put the real number in. So that's an additional 65.
But 90% of that will be reimbursed, right?
It will, but it affects,
90 or 80?
it affects what we can use for unassigned funds. However,
75 plus 15.
Right now, we're at 75.
75 plus, yeah, and it could be 90, but then there's 17.5% that we'll get from the state.
Okay.
So we'll get 92.5% back,
Okay.
but it won't, and maybe,
Didn't know how locked
maybe,
in that
maybe
percentage
more,
was.
it may be more. If the 75 could go to 90, then, yeah, but again, for FY26 budgeting,
Right.
for FY25 cash flow, which is sort of what we're looking at for projection of unassigned funds, that doesn't help us at all. But
Right.
yes, we will get that money back eventually. However, so where that led us was, we said, okay, 2 things for highway, 2 questions. What more can we expect that we haven't put into this budget yet? And are there areas that were budgeted in 25 that we're not going to fully expend because Pete has spent 6 months responding to flooding? So the answer to that first question is we're expecting about another $25,000 in Hillview expenses that are yet to come. Because there were some bills that we haven't gotten yet. I think Heinsberg Sand and Gravel, and some other material that is coming in. So we
Are those locked in, or is that going to be 25, 35?
So for
50,
Hillview,
50?
I think we went through a good conversation this afternoon. That should be all we're still expecting
Okay.
from Hillview. So that's where we plugged that, went from 1.77 to 1.86 in
Okay.
flood expenses. I will note, there is still, because we were like, okay, Pete, any other things we got to budget for? And again, appreciating that this is still an ongoing response to the flooding event. We're trying to do the best we can to keep up on expenses. We're wondering if we're missing an invoice from the contractor on Stage Road. He invoiced us once. Pete has called him several times, like, hey, we think you might need to invoice us still. He hasn't gotten back to us with anything. I know he had some family emergencies that he had to attend to, so that might be taking some of his time away. But we're going to continue to contact and try to find out, is there a missing invoice?
Are we budgeting as though there is?
We are not, because we don't know if there is, and we don't know how much.
Right.
Yeah, so
That could be a little,
that
surprise.
could be another between now and our January, probably 7th meeting, there could be another adjustment. So.
But we're tracking what we're contracting for, so we should know roughly what's out.
Well, we don't know exactly if there's a missing invoice, how much there would be on it. Because a lot of these were like, here's the road, let's get this done. So
Yeah.
we're kind of waiting to see if there's another invoice coming from this contractor.
And I will observe at least a couple of times we've increased the amount that we have
Yes.
allocated to something because, oh, the costs were higher than we anticipated. So that illustrates the unknown. In a lot of contracting, you go, oh, the maximum is 50,000, say. But when you have to repair something and it's 57,000, you're gonna have to pay the 57,000, even though you thought it might be 50,000 3
Mhm.
months ago.
And we acted fairly quickly to try to get roads
Yeah, so-
safe, passable and open, which meant we didn't have a chance to do a thorough bid process to get it done. And because, yeah, in the bid process, we'd say, hey, total contract price is this, you've only invoiced us for bit Y, we're gonna still have to pay you Z. But that unfortunately is not the way this is working in the emergency response.
If we'd done a proper bid process, given that everybody was so overcommitted, I mean, people were turning work down,
It would have,
that I think it would have
Within
been.
3 days, we had 5 mobilized contractors because we made that on the material project and we.
Oh,
paid-
absolutely.
We paid, so that's,
I'm just
they
saying,
just submitted for their time and equipment, and so we kept it really simple
Mhm.
and it kept our cost to a minimum.
right,
you know,
but if we'd gone
still-
through this, if we'd had world enough in time to do a bid process, otherwise,
They'd be starting the projects next week.
right,
There.
And it's,
and it might not have gotten us a better price.
had we waited
Mhm.
like 30 days to get that process in place, and then all the contractors were taken up, we'd have paid inflated prices. for it.
Absolutely.
The materials would all be gone.
and we
We just
would have.
call that on Tillman Avenue.
We would have had people stranded who couldn't get to their homes and traveling on.
Oh, right.
Want to
We-
be,
we
sitting up here
absolutely
trying to
did.
answer why you haven't fixed your road.
So we maybe don't want to go down that too far, but that's why we have a little bit of an unknown there still.
Yes.
And just wanted to make sure that the board had a heads up as we got that heads up today that we're still maybe waiting. So then we looked at the budget with Pete and said, well, are there projects that you plan to get to that you weren't able to get to this summer that you won't get to in the spring? So looking at gravel and aggregate, we're gonna be able to get the gravel plant on Kenyon Road, but there'll be about a $30,000 savings for other gravel roads that we won't be able to get to in the spring based on, we were supposed to get to them in the summer. So we added that in as a savings over the budget for FY 25. Next is stormwater and sidewalks. We plan that there's gonna be about a $60,000 savings. This was budgeted at $140,000. We know we've got about $10,000 in costs already in that. There's about another $70,000 probably for the Tilden Ave project that we're working on with drainage. But we're not gonna be able to construct the East Main Street sidewalk until probably after the spring. So we'll have some savings there. And really what that's gonna be is some concrete. So we've got a lot of the materials in the curbing and things like that. And again, that's another in-house project. It's not gonna be as expensive as a contracted project. But that's money that we won't spend in 25 that we'll have budgeted in 26 that we can spend in 26. And then looking at sand, this isn't really related to the flooding, but we came out of the fiscal year 24 last winter with a decent stockpile of sand that rolls over to 25. So Pete's pretty comfortable looking at that saying, yeah, we'll probably be under budget by $10,000 given a typical winter. So when we add those in, and the other thing we did was we took a look, now that we've had another round of AP in police, we have actually a full 6 months of expenditures in police, and we have Heinsberg's a little behind on billing us for the police services. So I think when we last looked at, we only had to bill for August. We've gotten
Didn't
or
we-
no, July. So we have one for July. We just did August, September. So looking at those, that gave us a little more realistic look at October, November, December. So this was about 39,000. So this is actual savings sort of in the bank. We're at 48,000. Again, a little bit of an estimate on what we're going to get billed for those last 3 months, but being consistent with the previous 3, I think that's a fair savings. So where that puts us, and then I'll go, is the total amount is now $73,000. I think we were at like 50 that we put to the budget. So there were some ups, there were some downs. Overall, there were more downs than ups. So we initially had an 8.43% tax increase. And after we went through everything there, we're here at a 7.95, which you maybe can't see super well on that, but that's just under 8%. So after all those machinations, we came out a little better.
All right.
And now there's questions.
So having raised the term stormwater, I do this thoughtfully if reluctantly. Thinking about Southview mitigation and the 3 acre rule, we really haven't budgeted anything for any costs associated with that. And based on last night's conversation, it's sort of, we're pushing over the horizon a bit. So I just want to draw a connection between what might turn into money, and we're conscious of it, but we have not addressed it in any budget estimate. Also because we don't really know what the engineering plan might look like.
Right.
So my question was basically the same, it's looking, we need. So Kevin Kitten from Southview, my question is the same line as what you just said, is that where do you put, or how are you going to pay for something if something comes out? You're talking 2 years out here in the budget right now, and by time you get the initial assessment from the study done, and then you go and get your grants or whatever can come in from state or other sources, you're eventually going to have to pay for part of that tail.
Mhm.
Just on the city streets. So I'm just curious, is it here in the budget, or is it a bond that you're going to have to ask for later? And then there's going to be the maintenance on the bond that has to be done, you know, what's the plan?
It's a good question. Right now, of course, this budget is through next year, so it carries us through about 18 months from now, right? So it's 18 months. This would be through next year. Any engineering plan, and then you go through permitting, et cetera. Pete, deferring to you, if you're just starting, what's the likelihood that we'd be doing anything in the next fiscal year anyway? Because to put her out to bid, we'd be having to put her out to bid in the spring or early.
Put out like in March. or
Well,
April.
And realistically, we wouldn't have a final design to go out to bid with until probably next fall.
Right.
Because
So-
we're doing the
Maybe
preliminary
26.
engineering
It
now.
would skip this fiscal.
So we might have some engineering fees that we would need to figure out, but I don't think we'd have any construction fees until FY 27.
Which is where the big money is. And the other thing I'll say, and based on last night's conversation and seeing what VLCT and others are doing, we have some hopes pinned on the legislature might do something. And so maybe that's not a disadvantage to be slowing down a bit to see what happens. Do they change that rule? When we ask various folks, what sort of punishments do we think ANR is likely to impose? Basically, what we've heard, a combination of political feasibility. The governor does not want to poke every homeowner with this.
No.
So that's in this really uncertain stage, it seems to me, but that also illustrates why we haven't budgeted anything for construction next year.
After last night's meeting too, was that this, we were going to defer this as much as possible. I mean, at some point, maybe we have to address it, but
Yeah.
it's.
So I guess I don't understand how you do your process here, but in past jobs I've had, is we would have a 5-year budget where we would place these types of expenses into a projection that would be tracked so that when the budget actually gets refined to actually submit, you would have something to refer to say, oh yeah, we need to look at these numbers. Do you do anything like that?
So I'll describe how the public engineering and construction process works. It typically starts with scoping to then ends up at final engineering and then bidding and then construction. The Regional Planning Commission, they say you should plan for at least 3 years in that. And it's not till you get to the first and second stage, you even know what the budget's gonna look like. How much do you budget? Like you're gonna buy a new car. How much is it gonna cost? You have no idea yet. So you don't actually know how much you're gonna budget.
But
until
you have an
get further in.
idea, you know, it's not gonna cost you $10,000 for a new car.
Right.
Well, we actually don't. I would dispute that. I don't have an idea because I am not sure the legislature is going to let this train keep going down the track.
No, but his point is for expenses that we know are coming, do we budget
Oh.
for those?
So for those, there is a bunch of planning at the department level that includes asset management. This is unusual because it falls out of the sky from the legislature. But in terms of our asset management plan and replacements and projects, like Pete could describe what he does for highway. There's a cruiser and equipment replacement plan for the police. The fire department has turnout gear and vehicle replacement plans. So all those things that are within departments, there is this forecasting to what's coming up later. And Connie talks about, do we want to raise the money in advance and or do we want to bond for it and borrow the money? And those are the two things, the two approaches. You either save it and or you borrow it. It appears to me that at least before I was on the select board, it was mostly bonding.
Mhm.
You need to buy a fire truck, you float a bond.
And then Roger Brown got involved.
And then there were a lot of conversations about how do you attenuate some of that in planning
Tax rates
ahead,
were-
Yeah.
because it was cycles. Like an example is police cruisers. You have zero money for a cruiser, and then you got to pay whatever it is, $70,000 for a cruiser this year. And so we've tried to flatten that out a little bit. And I would say Connie and the department heads get the credit for that, for really planning ahead for those things.
That doesn't appear, I mean, we don't see that at a public level.
Right, this, we
Well,
did go through
That
those.
document's there, it's called
Yeah.
capital plan.
We do have the capital.
This is
Any asset
the-
over $5,000 is spelled out.
These are the changes that we're talking about to finesse the final budget. But in past meetings, we went through line by line, so you've probably heard us refer to the gravel plan, the sidewalk reserve fund, the bridge and culvert fund.
Right, with the goal to have the money when the time comes to make the
I'm
expense.
just gonna
And-
pull up.
Yeah, we could pull stuff up that
Just
will
gonna-
give you a sample at
I'm trying
least.
to, but.
Yeah, no, I got the capital plan from
And
last
then
meeting.
for Southview, because you don't know what
Yeah.
it will be,
Right,
you're going to
it's the big unknown.
gamble that it's going to be now zero.
No, actually, I don't think we are.
You have a number in there then.
We don't, we,
We have a big
what
question
number should we
mark.
put in?
Yeah,
Well, I'm saying either you
And
think it's going to be
from-
something, and you should have a number of something out there, even if it's the best guess at 3 years out, 4 years out.
Sure.
Versus leaving it blank and say, hey, we'll deal with it when it comes, because that's where you get into that roller coaster ride on the budget. Because you're not really,
Well, right now, we're having such a tight year that if we budget money in anticipation of having to spend it, that's.
18 months out.
Yeah, 18 months out, that means that we're increasing the tax rate this year to pay for that money we're gonna spend 18 months out. That's, I think, one of the reasons why we're gambling, is because we are already in a bad enough situation. I don't know if that's really is a explanation that makes sense,
No, it
but
does.
we don't want to spend a penny we don't have to this year because we don't want a budget that just gets shut down.
So you maybe walk through some examples of this.
Yeah, so maybe highway's a good one. So highway equipment. So, and this is, we have one of these for every department, but like, let's take like dump truck number one. We're budgeting for $33,000 in FY 29 dump truck.
so in this example, like you
So-
talked about the other day about affordability here in town. Have you looked at some of these things? I know you don't want to push things out, but in tight times, do you start saying, say a third of the vehicles, maybe shove them out one additional year and shove
I've
out.
actually
sales?
discussed
So
Yeah.
I would suggest Pete speak to his replacement plan, because a lot of time and effort has gone into what's the right replacement plan
Mhm.
and having things covered under warranty or not ever under warranty. Like, Pete, what's an example of replacing an exhaust system on one of those large vehicles?
One of these newer diesel vehicles, trucks with the emissions and stuff that's on those, you could spend $25,000 to $30,000 replacing the emission system on that. Because of the clean burn, exhaust.
Mhm.
After 7 years, it's out of warranty and that's totally on you, so. We
But at
keep
7
our
years,
trucks
so
to
that's a
match
high
our
trade-in
warranty
value.
cycle to keep our equipment repair line in check, so we're not going 1 year, 10,000, next year, 50,000 next year. Up and down on repair with all these unknowns. They are emergency vehicles, so they're very important to keep on a
Mhm.
replacement cycle. They need to, like, right now. If those trucks were having all these, because they're pushed out and had all kinds of issues with them, we'd be doing a disservice to the taxpayers by having vehicles that, weren't functioning, so. It's been tried and true. When I started here, the town operated that way. They had kept vehicles for 13+ years. They had, put major amounts of money into vehicles that weren't worth half of the repair costs. So over time, it makes sense. With, these vehicles are $300,000. It makes sense to replace those on a good cycle where they bring back the best repair, best trade value, and you're being covered on the repair costs. So
And they're reliable.
And reliable, yeah.
Mhm.
We're talking like almost $2 million of equipment just in highway, so.
Connie, wasn't there one category, I should remember this, didn't we discuss not putting as much toward particular reserve account as we otherwise would have?
So I was gonna jump in on the one spot that we did bump out the replacement cycle was in the police cruisers.
Right.
Initially, we were gonna replace a cruiser in FY 26, but they haven't been driven as much as we would like them to be driven. So we looked at that and said, okay, we can kind of bump those all out a year. So we were doing that. And then to kind of build on what Jay is saying, what we looked at is so at the bottom of this plan, there's a contribution each year of how much we're gonna raise from taxes. And that builds out every year to try to keep the reserve at the end of the year in a positive balance. So what we started to do was really sharpen the pencil on, okay, can we reduce some of the contribution in FY 26 and then maybe increase the next 5 years by 10 grand and move it around a little bit to kind of reduce it this year. So we've done that in a number of categories, to the point where we're actually like negative, like 4 or 5 years out. But part of that, I guess, decision is that once we get reimbursed from FEMA, then we'll have some more money to reimburse the reserve funds that we're using and hopefully be able to kind of put back in a little more aggressively into those funds. So yeah, we're trying to do a lot with a lot of these things, but those are good questions and thank you.
Highway is a great example. Pete's been looking at this for decades and they've pulled the numbers out, looking at the replacement cycle, keeping it 7 years versus 8 years versus 9 years. And the data show that the money that was put into maintaining the vehicle at the end of that cycle far outweighed the savings of trading it in when it still had retail value. Buying a new vehicle still under warranty. What was that truck a few years ago? You kept an extra year and you had to put it, and what did that cost?
I think we spent $25,000 just on the engine.
Yeah.
And then, it's like nobody wanted to drive it. I'm afraid of something else gonna happen to it.
Yeah.
So, we pushed it because we thought we could squeeze another year, trying to kick the can down the road.
But not only is there a material savings, but a useful life too. When they go to the garage at 3 o'clock in the morning because we're getting freezing rains and the road has to be treated for people to get out for the morning commute and the truck doesn't start, or roads don't get serviced, people can't drive on the road safely.
Labor is wasted.
If this were a private company, we could hire a diesel fleet mechanic, however much a year, but we don't have that overhead. And, a private company, okay, so you're not going to plow a private parking lot for 8 hours. Well, Highway doesn't have that luxury. They've got to get out. So it's a big bonus to have a vehicle under warranty.
So another thing I'll say, the complexity of some of these projects like sidewalks, like frequently you get front end benefits of grants. And this is an example of stormwater. So the front end is the least expensive end, but between the Agency of Transportation, Regional Planning Commission pathways, you often get money to subsidize the planning at the front end. And then you sort of plan for that and you don't really know what it's going to cost often until you get there. And then you say, this is what it's going to cost. And then you figure out how to pay for it. If you're a larger town, you build up even bigger reserves. I don't know what it's going to be for, but here, example, where we have culverts and bridges, we've got replacement plans for vehicles where you plan ahead to the way you can. There's repaving, there's the gravel plan, treatment of the dirt roads. So those are the things that are trying to forecast ahead so nothing gets in really bad shape. Another thing that I'll say is Pete and his crew, current and past, have done a lot of work to deal with the ditches on the side of the road and helping to prevent them from washing out. Just over time, Pete, you can describe sort of what you do compared to what you did 20 years ago.
We are armoring all the ditches to new standards and especially in the last 2 years, we've actually increased the aggregate size in the ditches to exceed what the state recommendation was. 2 years ago, state recommendation was 8 to 12 inch stone. Now we're putting 24-inch stone because when you get 8 inches of rain in 10 hours, it's a deluge and you need that heavy armament to hold it. So certain things we're overbuilding because.
But saving substantially.
But yeah, and the good thing about it is we're being offset for these expenses by FEMA. So we're doing it under these flood recovery monies. So
A great example of spending a little more money and saving a lot of money is Kenyon Road. It used to be 10, 15 years ago, if we had a heavy dew in July, the road would wash out. The last couple of floods, because of the armoring of the banks, the road didn't wash out.
Mhm.
And maybe show a couple of projects in queue up here, because there were at one point some things where we looked out.
Think Richmond culvert.
An example of how you look over the horizon a little bit, to see what some future expenses are gonna be.
I mean, here's one, this might be, I can see the example. We've got a future project in Southview. It's a bridge that we're not budgeting for another 8 years or so. But it'll be, we're thinking it's gonna be about $1 million, so we're trying to raise some money for that, knowing that it's a larger project.
So I'm tempted to quote a former Secretary of Defense who said, there are the things we know, there are things we know we don't know, and there are things we don't know we don't know.
No.
I would describe the, 3-acre rule issues in Southview as things we know we don't know. We know we don't know how much it will cost. And we don't know what the legislature will do in the upcoming session about that.
Exactly. So how do you budget for that?
We've got our fingers crossed.
Go ahead.
So first, I'm looking at this. I appreciate you guys putting all this together. I have a few questions. Would it be possible, and I assume there's gonna be another round, you mentioned like a January 7th meeting or something. Are there overall like head count numbers and assumptions, like an assumptions page you could put? In other words, like, to your point, is head count staying flat? What raises, what health insurance increase are you assuming? Because I look at this, let's just say, high level 8%, and we're gonna go up every single year because we have. And we've been here, just us, 11 years, and our property taxes have like gone up 25%. I mean, a lot of us feel it's unsustainable. You get to this granular level and it begins to make sense and we understand and it's built up. But I'm wondering, besides building in assumptions so people can understand, like 8% to me is probably, if you just cut to the chase, that's
gonna interrupt
raises
you.
and health insurance increase.
Real quickly, it's 8% of the municipal tax, which
Right,
is
it's
about
not
a
even
third
the
of the total
education.
tax. The
So-
education tax is outpaced.
That's about 70% of your tax bill.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I know, but
Education
I'm still
taxes.
upset. I know. Yeah, I mean, I think at a very high level, if I saw the assumptions, I would be like, people cost more. Even if you
Yeah.
did nothing, you didn't hire another
Health
person,
insurance.
every year they're gonna cost more, and that's where you're at. So besides putting assumptions, would you be able to put a range, like, let's say, like, if you had to be at 3% increase, what would that mean? What would the trade-offs be? Like, do you have a range, like 3%, this is what it means, and it's bad, and maybe you don't replace cars before they're out of warranty, and maybe, I don't know, you don't have subs at the library. What does 3% mean versus 8%? So people can understand, because it's hard to see this every single year. And the other thing is, you really only get money from property tax. So it's always gonna go up.
Oh, we do get grant money and so forth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess just a couple of things to kind of speak to some of those questions. So one thing I think to start with on this budget is the actual expenses. So the bottom line expenses in fiscal year 25 was 4,915,000. This actually calls for less expenses at 4,849,000.
But that's a budget. You
So-
actually spent less in FY 24.
Right, but but the tax rate increase is based on the budget, right? So this is, even though we're budgeting to spend less in this current iteration of the budget in 26 than we did in 25. So that drives this. So you would expect that to go down, but the real big driver here is down here at the use of up unassigned funds. And what that is essentially surplus money that we come out of one fiscal year with that we haven't spent. So in FY '24, we put $500,000 into the budget.
It's your rainy day fund.
It's not a rainy day fund.
No.
No, it's
Legally,
basically a
no.
lot of where that's been generated the last couple of years is two places. Reimbursements from previous FEMA projects. So we've spent the money in previous years and then get it back a year or two later. And we've had some vacancy savings in the police department. So we've started, I guess, about 4 or 5 years ago, starting to put some money into the budget to offset taxes. In FY '24, we put 500,000 in. In last year's budget, we put $433,000 in. So
That's money that we budgeted for, but we didn't spend for unforeseen
right, so
reasons.
so we were
put that
giving,
money
we were sort of
ahead
rolling
the
it back
following
into the
year.
taxpayers. So this year, and that's where at the beginning of the project or the meeting, we were going through this exercise. Because at the end of this year, we ended the year with $1.5 million in unassigned funds. So had we not had a flood,
2 floods.
no, had we not had a flood in 24, so.
Had we not had the floods.
Had we not had a flood in 24, we would have $1.5 million that we could say, great, we can use this to
Get that
offset the
back.
budget and we'll be fine. The fact that we had $1.8 million in flood damage, and we're counting what we're getting back, but that puts us at this spot where we can really only use about $73,000 to roll back into the budget. Because we have a policy that says we want to keep 15% of next year's budget on hand. That is essentially, we can't call it a rainy day fund, but that's sort of like, we want to make sure that we have that for cash flow. And if we have another crisis, we also know that we can get some emergency loans if we really need it. But the guidance that the board has been going with, and they passed a policy last fall, was they want to keep 15%. So that's where this calculation flows down to 73,000, and that pops into here. So I mean, like, just for, if we were able to put 433, it would significantly lower the tax rate.
So
I was just going to comment, the 15% is a figure that came from our auditors and we sort of kicked it around. It's not just, we pulled it out of the air.
yeah, I'm just saying, if you're trying to say, like, sell this to the general population, if you just did a high level, here's our basic assumptions.
Yeah.
Head count flat, percentage raises, health insurance increases, things that people could understand.
Yeah,
Then if you think if it's worthwhile, a different version of, if we went lower and, we did nothing more and you stayed flat or you stayed at 3%, here's what that means to people.
no, I think that's, and in a town meeting year, we usually do a lot of that at town meeting, like I'll have a half-hour long presentation that walks through a lot of the budget and where the ups are, where the downs are, where the challenges are. And I think we'll do that at least before we go to the
Right.
voters. We might have to do some more in January as we continue to refine the budget. So that's a good point.
That's good feedback for us to hear because we've been mired in this for months.
Yeah.
Right. You get in the weeds. This is what I kind of used to do for a living. So,
Just going to grab
Can't
the
help it.
people on Zoom and then I'll get
Yeah.
back to you guys. Jeff, I think you had your hand up first.
Thank you. I think you've been getting good comments. I'd like to make a couple of comments and then I have a specific a budgetary question. One is that I want to commend our road crew, Pete and our road crew. This is a really challenging year. I think one of those high level comments that we should make relative to this budget is this budget is impacted dramatically by the flooding that we had both in 2023 and 2024. And, if you were to choose not to do some of the repairs that Pete had to do, we would probably save money and we would probably have a smaller budget increase. And I don't think anybody wants that. So that would be just a general comment. For a really specific little point is on under contracted services. We're contracting with Howard Mental Health for their community outreach program. We paid last year. We budgeted $10,000 for that. This year we're budgeting $12,500. I think it's in that line item. If I'm correct, am I correct on that?
You are, I'm trying, I think it's under, did I just go by it? What was it?
It did go up, Jeff. I thought it went up more than you just said it did, but Josh is pulling up the numbers right
Where is
now.
it? I forget where it is in the budget. Is it in police?
It is in police.
No, I think it's below the charitable contributions.
It's in contributions. I can explain
Oh.
there. Let me get there. and
Was-
I'll-
didn't
Right
that-
there, right, I think isn't it, contracted services, community outreach is up to 12.5, right?
So the reason for that is we have an agreement with Howard Mental Health that was, I think, a 4 or 5 year agreement, and it was based on the cost structure. And I'd initially budgeted based on that agreement. I think it was just over $11,000 for FY 26. However, there's a clause in that agreement that if they lose a certain amount of funding, which I think they're going to lose a grant, then they can reopen the contract and come back to municipalities and ask for more funds. So they've enacted that because they lost a grant. I think it has to do with the funding. Actually, no, that's CJC. Honestly, I'm
Yeah,
not
that's
super,
okay.
I'm not super close to exactly what happened, but because here's why. They lost some funding. They came to us. They said, look, you're going to be at 12 between Richmond and Heinsberg, you're going to be at $25,000. So I took half of that, put it in there. It was like $1,000 more than I was already budgeting. So I haven't spent a lot of time to dig really into exactly what their changes are. And the reason why I haven't is because it's only like $1,000, $1,500 change for us. But that explains why that's going up a little bit. It was going to go up a little bit anyway. It just went up a little bit more.
Okay, so my point with Howard Mental Health specifically is even at $10,000, it's unclear to me what services we've actually received from them, and they haven't been able to actually tell us what services that we received from them specifically, at least not in a very clear way. And so increasing the amount of money we give to them is just a little, it's annoying. I understand it's not. It's not a lot of money here. It's a fine point. But it's just, it's frustrating
So,
getting
yeah,
information.
so I hear you, and this is feedback that we've given to Howard Mental Health over the last year or more about reporting that's more timely and more specific to Richmond, because sometimes they'll give us reports, it's hard to really understand what is specific to Richmond, what does the data mean? I know they've been working on it. It hasn't been fast. We did have a joint meeting with Chief Cambridge, Todd Odit from the town manager of Heinsberg and Howard Mental Health staff. And in that meeting, that's when they were talking to us about the cost increases. We reiterated the need for better data and better understanding of exactly the services that are providing to the community, both through the police department as well as through individuals calling directly. And because we had told them that we will get questions, ourselves included, but also from the public about, is this worth it? And do we want to continue to do this? So they assured us they're continuing to work on it. I understand the question. I think right now, because it's in the budget for about 12,500, maybe give them another year and see, but it's up to the board, really.
Well, and we asked them essentially the same thing last year, and I'm not suggesting taking it out of this budget, but I am suggesting that next year, if you don't get results, you might reconsider this line item completely.
I would.
One last point that I would like to make, and it's not a question. It's more actually one of the things I think that you're doing well. I really support the capital budget, the capital plan that we have. I really like this policy change of planning for future expenses and putting some away in reserve accounts for various different expenses that we can foresee. And I also support the line items that you're taking out this year because of basically because of the flooding. Yes, health insurance hurts, and that would certainly have it would be worth putting in your presentation how much of an increase the health insurance is impacting our budget. But I think a large part of this is a large part of the increase is due to the flooding expenses that we have and we haven't gotten reimbursed yet for.
Right.
So that would be just a comment.
Thanks, Jeff. Caitlin?
Hi, thank you. could you go to the capital detailed by department spreadsheet you have and go to the fire department tab? I have a statement regarding this and then a couple questions or requests regarding this budget specifically. So last night we heard that the fire department is having a struggle with how they are recruiting firefighters and keeping retention overall. We discussed options of bringing in a consultant or stipends or otherwise, all of which are great ideas to explore. And it was stated that we have 15 volunteer members in the fire department today, and we're doing less than 250 calls per year. So there is a line item here under rescue truck number 4. I understand that we have a rescue truck that we are replacing, and the new replacement is the major cost that we're seeing here. This new truck is the type of truck that services a department that is doing perhaps over 5,000 calls per year in a city where specialized response is required. There's no reason that this town, which is doing less than 250 calls per year, needs a dedicated rescue truck when the industry standard is rescue engines. And for clarity, a rescue truck is a more dedicated rescue operations, while a rescue engine is a hybrid of firefighting and rescue functions. So we already have a rescue engine, and that has been effectively doing the job for years, that hybrid approach. And for comparison, Williston doesn't even have a truck like this that we're trying to bring in. It's a much bigger department. Additionally, our volunteer firefighters aren't continuously trained on as technical rescue providers at the level that they would need to be. So the only rescue equipment that they need can be accommodated on the existing rescue engine that we have in place. In addition to the point that we have no need for this truck, we also already have 3 other trucks, excluding the brush truck that we're selling, and then excluding this new truck or the truck that it is replacing, which I would also encourage us to explore selling. And then I understand that this truck isn't showing up tomorrow and we're planning over many fiscal years, but the data that we're seeing and that we saw last night is showing that there's a steady decrease in retention of firefighters, and we don't have a clear path forward of how to address that or the ability to be confident that we will. There might be a time where we don't even have enough firefighters or manpower to staff and fully utilize the trucks that we have at any given time. This truck, this specific rescue truck, is despite having a 500-gallon tank that was added, and for reference, the average amount of water to put out a small house fire is about 3,000 gallons. So it's likely that there would need to be 2 staff trucks needed in order to respond to calls with this new truck that we're trying to purchase. This is a huge risk for the community, and when we're talking about line items and just like small money pieces, this is a very big purchase that is completely unnecessary. And in terms of money allocation, I would encourage us to look at this specifically to be something that more services the broader needs of the company, that explores that consulting or the stipends or some of these other topics that we've been bringing up as well. I'm honestly not sure how this has gotten this far, and I apologize I wasn't part of some of the previous meetings to be able to speak to this, but I am asking a few things. I asked that we explore terminating this contract immediately. This is an insane amount of money to be spending on a piece of equipment that we do not need. And I would also like to see us review the contract that we have in place to determine if we could get our deposit back or not. And if not, that we would consider selling the existing rescue truck as a means to make up that loss so that we aren't losing money on that. And then most importantly, and here's the biggest next step forward that I was encouraged us to do regardless of the path that we take, is that I would like to see a needs assessment done overall for the fire department as we look towards the future of our department and how we could best serve our volunteers and the community overall.
Thank you. Could the fire department just explain what the rescue truck is, what its use is, what its intended purpose is, and how it's utilized?
Jerry Elbeck, the Assistant Fire Chief. The current truck we have for rescue truck is a 2005. And it is on a 20-year replacement plan, just like all of our fire trucks. And right now, this 2005 truck is nickel and diming us quite a bit of money because we actually won't pay that off until next year. And the new rescue truck is why we put 500 gallons of water on it with a pump, is that will be our main truck to go onto the interstate. Right now, we're taking 2 to 3 trucks on the interstate every call. If we have enough manpower that will show up at the fire station and we can put 4 guys in the truck, then we will not have to take other trucks to every call that's on the interstate. And most of our calls, 60 to 70%, is on the interstate or car accidents.
Why can't we take just one engine today?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Question was why not just take one engine? And I'll just add another question. So how many gallons do you need, like when that 18-wheeler was on fire a couple of years ago?
18-wheeler, we probably used close to 6,000 gallons of water.
And there's no fire hydrant on the interstate.
No, we had to tank it in from,
We don't have a hydrant out of the interstate like the state would like us to have.
Right.
But back to that question.
Why does it take 2 to 3 trucks now and it'll only take 1 truck when we have the new truck?
because the rescue truck that we currently use right now has all the stabilizing bars on it, all the cribbing equipment. And engine 2 is our first truck out the door. It has a little bit of stabilizing equipment just by wood blocks because there's no room to put stabilizing bars on. But we do have hydraulic tools, so we can start working on the car. But that's, most of the time it's 2 or 3 firemen that go out the door with that truck, and then the incoming fireman from outside the village takes the next truck out.
And there's always another town that's responding with us, correct? Because Bolton would respond with us, or if it was an interstate thing, Williston would respond as well. So why do we need to take multiple trucks when we're also seeing other trucks from other towns that could assist in the same way?
Because the call volume in Williston, we're not guaranteed any help from them. In Bolton, we may get 2, possibly 3 people on an average call from Bolton, but that's not guaranteed. We've had some day calls in the last month that we only received 1 person from Bolton and 5 people from Richmond.
So it sounds like you're telling us that you need this truck to get that water to the situation, whereas a
Well,
truck from Williston or a truck from
Right,
Bolton. would
this
be-
truck will be, well, if we go to an automobile accident, if unfortunately the car catches on fire, we do have 500 gallons of water, we can put it out. And if we have to take a bigger truck to that, then you're talking the 1,800 gallons. And then after that's a 2,000 gallon truck. So depending on the call, you're not sure exactly what resources you actually need.
Bart?
If I were gonna sort of paraphrase or rephrase Caitlin's question, if you didn't have this truck, what would you do? And I think what she's saying is, could you use one of the other trucks instead of the rescue truck for the first vehicle on site?
That's what we're doing now. We're using engine 2, but it doesn't have all our full equipment that we need. So this rescue truck would be capable of doing all car accidents and extrication on the interstate or on Route 2.
Right, does the current truck, the current rescue truck, does it carry water? Or
No.
So that's why you bring the water out first, then the rescue truck.
Yes,
And when we have this new truck, it'll be a truck that has 500 gallons of water and all the extrication equipment.
correct.
One truck carries all the equipment and the water versus a water truck and an equipment truck now.
Yep.
I think,
And if I'm thinking ahead to what Caitlin might ask, if, would this rescue truck displace a need for any of the other trucks? And where she's really going, I think, is how much inventory of different kinds of vehicles do we need in Richmond?
Well, at the next truck replacement is 2031. And there's been even questions from the firemen if we really need an extra engine in the station. If we could drop down a truck or go to a mini pumper or something like that.
Adam, go ahead. Adam, you had your hand up. We seem to have lost
Yeah.
you.
Hey, I was wondering if can you hear me? I had to turn off my headphones. Yeah, I mean, obviously so to maintain the same apparatus that we've had, it does make sense to buy a new rescue truck if our goal is to replace the existing rescue truck. I guess we're already under contract, so there's some contract issues there and all that stuff. I mean, realistically with staffing, I think it would be possible to get all the stuff we needed onto engines. I know this is an unpopular opinion. I don't want to dive into too much here, but a lot of surrounding departments have done away with rescue trucks entirely with the advent of battery tools. And then, having less equipment that they're more highly trained on seems to be the industry standard now. There's less branching out, but I mean, the way Richmond's going is we were trying to maintain the same equipment. And then obviously if we're trying to do that, this truck would give us a reliable truck to do that with. So that's kind of the reasoning behind the purchase, I guess.
Thank you, Adam. Caitlin?
Yeah, I think going back to your point of that you need this truck in order to use the stabilizers and so forth. And just to be clear, my dad was a fire chief at many fire stations in Maine, so I'm very well versed in this information and basically grew up in a fire station. So are you doing the required training, all the additional stabilizing on all that additional stabilizing equipment every 6 months that's required by the NFPA?
Roughly, yes. I can't tell you the exact dates, but we do have we just had a class a month ago down to Rod West. He had 2 cars that we did extrication on. And usually in the spring when we get new members, if we get new members, we'll get a car and do extrication classes in the spring and fall.
So just to comment on that, the what I heard from last night was that we're having a hard time, A, recruiting, and B, maintaining members of the fire department, which means that, we're probably getting new folks as we can and not necessarily retaining folks, so not retaining that training. I also heard that it was hard to have people participate in those trainings where necessary because they're volunteers. They're typically having full-time jobs elsewhere and so forth. So how many people are participating consistently in those trainings that would then be able to respond to those calls with this truck? And I think I'm pushing on this because this is an up to $800,000 line item that is, again, I believe completely unnecessary, as other towns around us do not have this and have found other means to respond to
Caitlin,
that.
I'm just going to stop you here. We're looking for questions and comments, and you're clearly questioning the judgment of the people who are actually using this equipment. So we're pretty deep into this conversation. Can I just ask you to summarize what your statement or question is in 30 seconds so we can move on?
We can move on. I think I've said all I need to.
Okay, thank you. Bard?
Well, David, in an attempt to sort of bring it to a close and tie it with a bow.
Yeah.
If we didn't buy this truck, this rescue truck, what are the implications? What happens? How does it impact your functioning response?
We'd be taking more trucks and more calls. And to answer her question, we have 8 to 12 people show up for trainings, just about every training night. The actual cost of the truck is $595,000. And we've already paid for the chassis at $132,000. So we have $400,000 left to pay for the truck.
So a follow-up question, if I could, David. So if we think this truck could be used for things that other trucks are currently used for, and I think you may have said this, can we reduce our fleet by one of the other trucks, like?
In 2031, when we want to replace engine 1, that would be the time to reduce your fleet.
Or could we, I'm just broaching the subject, could we sell engine 1 if we don't need it?
Possibly, but I think it would take more of a conversation between us.
But ultimately, this truck could reduce the number of overall trucks.
Yes.
Now, I believe when this truck was ordered, there was a concern that you can't get water up steep driveways to structure fires where this truck would get the initial 500 gallons to the fire.
No, that was, this is our new utility truck
Okay,
that we
okay.
just received and was damaged in
one truck
July.
off.
Yes.
Well, that's where I was headed. Can the rescue truck go where these 3 trucks cannot?
It may, I'm not gonna say 100% yes, but it may make a little more headway because it won't be quite as heavy as the bigger trucks.
And if you look at line number 3, fire truck number 1, we do already have a note there to change to a small pumper or to look further at it.
Pardon?
So I don't know if we can do this in the next 2 to 5 weeks, more or less. But could we contemplate what would it take to reduce our fleet, if it's feasible to reduce the fleet of trucks? And how that would work in combination with this rescue truck that's already coming online? And where I was going is, if that's coming online, do you think that has distinct advantages? Is it possible to reduce by one of the other trucks, which could generate some one-time revenue if you sell it, and also reduce ongoing maintenance? If you're just on a vehicle, you don't have to maintain it.
I think that would be a conversation for the firemen
Yes,
and the board. I'm not gonna make any decisions on that.
yeah,
Because as you noticed last night, we had a lot of good ideas from some of the firemen.
I'd say if you're gonna sell that engine one, you'd end up going through these ladies that do sell trucks, you probably won't get more than probably $85,000 for it. It's worth it to keep it, instead of getting rid of it. It's worth more to keep it than to sell it.
So just a quick example, Bolton just got a new tanker. And they took one of their engines out of service, they can't sell it.
who
They-
wants it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, she does. I already have a tanker.
That might be part of the conversation with the fire department is, if we were to sell this, what would the minimum amount be that we would need to make it worthwhile? To
Yeah.
offset, the value of keeping it. So I think there's a few things to look at, and it's a good conversation to probably have.
And I think, again, of both cash value, but also maintenance, whatever the
Maintenance cost.
ongoing maintenance is. If you're down a vehicle, there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't have to do for that
Yeah.
gone vehicle. So maybe that's something that, early in the next calendar year, we might entertain again, just following up on this topic that Caitlin identified.
Is this rescue truck four-wheel drive?
Pardon me?
Is that a four-wheel drive vehicle?
No.
No, it's not, okay, just rear wheel.
Thank you. I don't know where we were.
Well, I was sort of at the end of my initial run through, and I think we had some really good feedback and questions and some good ideas. I guess the spot that I would go next, unless anybody wants to go, is looking back at, the changes that we had looked at in admin and police
Staff positions.
staff positions, sorry, yes.
So if we go back to those, and again, if we approach it with the principle that if we were in a flat line staff positions across the departments, what would that look like?
Well, right, and that's where we're at. That's
Just
what.
Gonna stop you real quick.
Yeah.
Adam, I see your hand is up. Go ahead, and then Patty, we'll get to you in a minute.
Oh. You guys hear me? Sorry about
We
that.
can.
Yeah, so I just had a quick question. I was looking through and I saw that we have, a fully budgeted in the police department. We have a fully budgeted, obviously salary line item. And then we also have a line item for chief's services. And I understand that line item. I think my understanding was that, we're paying for chief services right now from Heinsberg, which makes sense. And so if we were, I guess, I don't understand why we would need to budget both of them fully. And then I guess this is probably a question I could have asked you, Josh, specifically, but I understand why we need the money for both, but if we have a fully budgeted department and we don't have a chief, couldn't we use the salary budget amount for that to cover chief services? And then if there were to ever be a chief hired, we would then use the salary amount, or vice versa. I guess why do we have both of those budgeted? Or is that how we budget chief services differently than salary?
That's what in previous years, we would have had chief included in salary. Right now, the salary line for FY 26 of this 375, that just includes the 4 officers.
Gotcha. Okay, so we would, if we were to change it, we would just add the chief services into the salary, but the number would kind of, relatively speaking, stay the same.
The number would stay the
Gotcha.
same. And
Okay,
yeah,
thank you. I just wasn't, on the
budget
face of it, I guess it makes sense because the values have gone up. And so even though the salary amount looks flat, with everything going up, that's been pulled out. So
Yeah,
that makes sense.
and-
Thank you.
and we also, you know, some of the changes here might be that we also, well, maybe not to 25, but we did increase wages. So we're based, that was what, last spring of 23. So there was an increase in the wage grid with the union. So this is based on filling vacant positions in that wage grid. So that might also account for some of the perceived increase of, yeah, because if you look at it to 24, right, that would include the chief.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Doesn't. But with that increase and then looking at, you know, where would we put an experienced officer on that grid? You know, some of it's a little bit of guesswork as far as where we think we're gonna land on the grid, but that helps to explain it.
Bart?
And Josh, earlier you went through an estimated vacancy savings in police, which is essentially a combination of employees and contract services from Heinsberg. So that's where the salary and contract payments are a little fuzzy, but for budgeting purposes, we budget salary and you might pay it out in contract hours, right?
Yeah, so correct. So yeah, in this salary, like that's where right now we have 1 officer. So the rest of that is made up partially at least or mostly by the contract services.
And earlier tonight you showed, what was it, $43,000 or something?
Yeah, right
allocated.
now we're at about $48,000 year to date in savings. That's
From
actual
July 1st.
from July, sorry, yes, fiscal year to date.
Yeah.
So that's the first 6 months of this year. Based on actual expenses versus 6 months of the budget.
So a follow-up question regarding this one. So that represents 6 months year to date. Do we anticipate on January 1st that we'll have 4 full-time or contract positions?
Probably not on January 1st. We do have some applicants that we're continuing to move forward with, and hopefully they work out and we can get them here, but it won't be January 1st. We might have, you know, I get where you're going, is could we budget in a couple more weeks or months of savings, and we might be able to look at that. I wouldn't want to do that on the fly tonight.
Yes.
I think it's something to look at for the next iteration of let's assume we're fully staffed by March 1st. And what does that give us for extra savings?
So I'd like to sort of suggest we put a pin in this, David, and say, I think, 6 months we're pretty predictable, but I'm guessing we won't have the complete costs. We won't be spending 100% of budgeted in January, February anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Unless we've already made job offers and people are starting in a few weeks. It means they're gonna go out to at least February, if not March, right, for
Yeah,
that process?
it's probably gonna take a little bit to kind of work through all the final pieces of anything with an op.
So I recognize we can't be exact. I'm just thinking we might up our vacancy savings here by some modest amount, just knowing how the time-space continuum works.
Did you want to get Patty's question in, or did you want to?
Or does Adam still have a follow-up?
Adam, are you done, or do you have more? If you're talking, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm done. I was
Okay.
talking to my kids, so I had to mute.
If you want to go to Patty, go.
Let us know if they have any comments.
I
Patty,
don't think
go
you want to hear the conversation. It's not gonna be, it's not gonna be relevant.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Patty, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question from a little while ago. I've been seeing opt out of insurance, $5,000. So I'm assuming that's one person. Is that what we pay people when they opt out of insurance, health insurance?
Yeah.
So,
So 2,500 is a single person and 5,000 is a 2-person plus.
Opt-out.
Right, and a family is 30,000?
The cost for a family plan?
Yeah.
close to that.
You're in the neighborhood. Connie's looking it up.
I'm looking it up.
Okay, my point is, I recall, as a teacher, that, the offering was too low for anybody to give up two insurances, a husband and wife. If someone's just gonna offer you $5,000 in order for the district to save 25,000, if $30,000 a year for health insurance, $5,000 isn't that great of an incentive. And I would just recommend that you look into the possibility of raising that. No matter what you do, you're going to win, right? For instance, if you made it $10,000 or 15, you'd still make $15,000, which with the number of employees we have that are full-time, I have no idea how many that is, who are on family plans, you could probably save quite a bit of money as we see health insurance go up and up and up.
Follow up to Patty's question, and I think this is relevant based on our experience at the current levels. How many people currently opt out, if you can find that relatively quickly, Connie?
She's got a spreadsheet.
Which spreadsheet that's on?
Yes.
It looked like 3 or 4 as I saw those numbers go by.
No, I think we have more. We have
Yeah,
4, 5, 6.
I don't pretend.
Three
to
of
be
them.
able to-
Hang on.
Um,
I think I have the MVP
What
page
about-
on the
what
budget.
about the
chart.
wage? Don't you have the total compensation grid? And you could just kind of go through and count 5s and 2s.
Oh, it's the salaries and benefit one.
That's what I'm saying. That's the one, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Put down my opt-outs.
Yeah, you
So
have.
at any rate, a family plan is $40,000 a year
gee.
with the employee picking up 10%. So,
So
Yeah.
30,000.
and I think we only have 2 people on the family plan. Let's see. No, let's see. We
No,
have,
it's more than that.
yep, we
No,
only
that'd
have,
be 36,000.
Right.
we only have 2 people on a family plan.
We're really looking at the opt-outs though, as we get stuck in the benefits for a long
Hang on.
time.
I'm getting there.
You had everybody on the insurance, town's insurance, and then deduct what everybody takes for opt-out, it's all the difference. It's significant.
Yeah, it is.
So I'm just gonna say a term I learned a long time ago is those are not savings, those are avoided costs.
Yes. But if those people did choose to stay on
Yeah.
the town, which. So that's a bonus.
5, 7.
So 7 people taking the opt-out at its current level out of how many total employees?
That are eligible.
Yes.
Out of 7, 11, 12, 14.
So half.
It's hard to picture how we're gonna get better, what I'm gonna use an awkward term, market penetration of the opt-out when we're already at 50%.
And I think the VLCT study showed that, and when you talked to the compensation people, Josh, didn't they say we're on target?
Yeah, I think we were about average with,
Yeah.
with the amount that we opt out of.
In terms of what our
What our
other
operating is.
towns are doing
Yeah.
for the opt-out benefit. Do we know what the other towns are experiencing in the opt-out rate? If we're at 50%, to Patty's point, that seems relatively high. People are opting out for not a huge amount of money.
It all depends on the family situation. We actually
employee.
had an employee that went off a 2-person plan and onto a single high deductible this time because the spouse has the same benefit available to her where she is. They're gonna see how that works. We had somebody go off a family platinum onto a family high deductible to see how it worked.
Good benefit.
We have, a lot of our employees are aging, so they're really interested in that HSA as a retirement.
For aging, if they're not, they're dead.
Well,
If they're not, they don't need insurance.
But they're really,
Different interest.
really looking at the HSA as a retirement benefit for them that they can contribute to.
I will say, when I turned 50, I went to the platinum plan and it's worked out very well for me.
And I guess I was just doing another quick count. I think I get 11 positions that we're budgeting for insurance. That includes vacant positions that were like, I think we're budgeting all police at a 2-person.
Oh, okay.
So
Sure,
yeah, I
yeah,
think
right.
you said.
I'm
people
looking
were
at where we
active
are now, yeah.
In the budget, when we have a vacant position, our practice is to budget that at a 2-person insurance plan, knowing it could be up, it could be down, but that's sort of an average.
So I observe, I think that's the right way to budget.
Yeah.
But when we're counting what people actually decide for, those people don't exist, so I would ignore
So
them.
Connie's number is better in that.
And I'd go for what people are actually deciding, it's 7 of 14,
Yeah.
which is 50%. It seems unlikely we're gonna get higher than that
Yeah,
with
that
a
sounds
higher
high.
opt-out.
This is the highest I've seen the opt-out since I've been here.
Interesting.
So Patty,
I
we
have
have
another
discussed
question.
that. Oh, go ahead.
My hand, yeah, I think that sounds great. If we got 50%, I'm really surprised. I didn't realize we had so few full-time employees. I'm surprised it's only 14 people. So that's interesting too. But anyways, my other questions have to do with the police department, and I'm just wondering if you could bring that back up again. So I'm hearing that we have budgeted for year 24-25. That the year that we already passed the budget was 4 police officers. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Right.
the 25 was budgeted at 4 police officers, and again, we had $78,000 for a shared police chief.
Okay, that was the other piece I wanted. So we chip in 78,000 for the police chief.
We
That is-
budgeted.
That is,
For
yeah, we
our,
budget.
for our half of whatever, the police chief.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And I also, I had emailed with Josh that it appears that we do have budgeted for this year a administrative assistant for the police department. Is that correct?
So yes, correct. We've got a 20-hour admin budgeted in 25, and then in this iteration of the budget, we went back to like, okay, let's flatten out the staffing also for a 20-hour admin. We haven't, in our admin left in the spring, who's been here for a number of years, we haven't really advertised the position because we went back and forth with Heinsberg for a little bit on could we increase the hours? Could we split it with you? And then we sort of ended up getting into budget season, and now things are a bit up in the air as far as like, is that going to stay at 20? Is it going to be more? Is it going to be less? So I kind of like at least some level of certainty before we advertise that, because it's a little different, a 40-hour position versus a 20-hour position, where you're going to get for that. So
is that part of the 48,000 savings in not that we didn't fill a position for a little while? So is that part of that 48,000 that we
yeah,
saved?
that would be part of the vacancy savings, correct? Yes, for this
Okay.
fiscal.
So we now have we figured out if that Heinsberg is not going to? I thought you said at the last meeting, Josh, that Heinsberg is not going to split that cost. Is that correct, or is that your?
Right, that's what I understood at the last meeting. I understand from a conversation last week, they might have some money in part-time officers that they might be able to work with us on. I don't think we can count that as certain. I think we sort of need to make our decision on what our budget is, and then we should probably, I think we'll have a better idea. Heinsberg is mostly finalizing their budget tomorrow before they go to a public hearing on it. So we might be able to get some more feedback from Heinsberg by the end of this week.
Bart?
I note that Anthony's in the room, and I don't know if he has any insight into this, like how it might be playing out in terms of admin assistant support from the Heinsberg budget.
Yeah, I don't think that it's currently budgeted in the Heinsberg budget, but when I talked to their manager, he said, well, there might be a possibility we could use some of the part-time hours that we have towards that. But I think that is worth a follow-up call on Thursday to say, how did your budget finalize on Wednesday? And are you interested in allocating some money towards admin?
So it would seem to me if we follow this principle of flatline staffing, which is probably not the right word to use. But if we
Level funding.
staff our FTEs, that we would continue at 20 hours in that position as currently budgeted.
So can I just say, recommend that on Thursday, if when you know the answer, I mean, we have had an admin person budgeted since last July, I guess is when our budget year begins, and we haven't had an admin for all that time because of uncertainty, which is really a shame. And I guess I would just say, if on Thursday we find out that we are in fact going to only have a 20-hour-a-week person, that we begin the process, we tell the chief that we're, or instruct the chief to start looking for someone, or I'm not sure how the hiring works with the town, but let's get rolling on that so that, maybe we can get someone on board, in January or February, and get rolling on that 20-hour a week person. I'm wondering, is in the next budget, do we have 4 police officers budgeted for next year?
Well, I think that's what we're trying to figure out. Right now, the way I structured this version of the budget to present to the board was to go back to level funding leveling staff to what we have in FY25. In the version we looked at, this was just last week, we were looking at, well, if we went to 3 officers, how would that look for savings, and how would that help affect the tax rate? We also had some other changes in admin. So right now, as presented, this has 4 officers, but I think that's the next part of our discussion.
All right.
So if we went to 3 officers, we would be reducing this department. Is that correct? We wouldn't be flat budgeting. We would be actually reducing the police department.
Correct. And that's sort of the next phase of the discussion is, what do we want to increase? What do we want to reduce?
Okay, thank you.
Bart?
So I'll just observe, the organizations that I've worked in both in state government and looking at private nonprofit organizations. What, in my experience, people have done, if you have a position, you budget it for 12 months. And you have 12 positions, you budget them for 12 months, and you make assumptions about health insurance. And it as you accrue vacancy savings, you view that as one-time funding that you can then use for something else. We've been encouraged at times like, well, if you can't fill all the positions, just fund 3 positions, budget 3 positions. But what happens then is if we actually have hopes of filling 4 positions, we will not be able to do it because we have budgeted for 3 positions. So I think this hinges on, is it reasonable to think we're going to fill the officer positions next year or this year? Or do we want to, in my view, if we go to 3 positions, we drop a pretense that we're trying to recruit 4. We say we are budgeting 3 and the maximum we will recruit and hire is 3.
To add on to Barb, I'm sorry. This is Kevin Kittinger. This is to add on to your statement there, Barb. You're also making an assumption that when you add these 3 and 4 people, it happens on day 1. In reality, it takes time to bring on each additional person. So that if it took 6 months, then you could reduce the amount of staff because the first half of the year is not being used in those positions.
So to be clear, this budget starts July 1st, which is about 6 months from today. So a crucial question to that, since 6 months, if you're saying 6 months into the next year, that's a year from now. So a real question is, what do we think we're going to accomplish between this year and July 1st? How plausible is it that we will fill how many positions? So we've got 1 filled today. And I guess Josh, Anthony, if you have any sense, like that we have a different scenario than we've had in the last 2 years, that we actually think we are or are capable of filling a total of 3 or even 4 positions in the next 6 months? I think that's a crucial question for this budget exercise.
I mean, I know we've got a couple of candidates that we've looked at that we're, still working through some processes with that I think have a likelihood that we would be able to land them in the next couple of months.
And that would leave us with 3?
I think that would at least
Give us
get it,
3.
I think I could say with some certainty that would at least get us two more.
2
2
additions.
more, which is a total of 3.
Total of 3, and, then filling that 4th position. Yeah, I think there's a likelihood we might find somebody there too, but I know we've said that before every budget season the past 2 years, so I don't want to overpromise, yet again, but again, we're continuing to try to recruit and bring people in, and it's always our goal to try to fill it up.
So another suggestion that was made to your point was for next year, should we budget 3.5? And it's not that you hire a half-time person, it was along this
Budget
idea
for the
that,
year.
hey, maybe we hope to hit July 1st with 3, and that would mean we shoot for hiring a 4th by the middle of the year.
You're also making an assumption that none of them are gonna leave by that
Exactly.
time as well.
Which is an assumption we make in the highway department and the library and everything. So I don't want to, it's not that I'm adamantly refusing to be dragged down this road. I just have never seen any other organization where I have worked or with whom I've worked budget in a way where you bake in vacancy savings. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I've just never seen it.
Yeah.
Chief?
I just want to say that, yes, to answer your question, yes, this year will be different. We will fill those positions, and I think it's imperative for 2 reasons. Number one, get us on equal footing with Heinsberg, especially if Heinsberg is going to be cutting. And I just think that this time right now with what's going on, we've made some progress. I think things are going to get a little better. We've made a few significant arrests. We made one on Sunday, but with what's happening, I definitely think this is not a time to reduce in any way.
I have just another suggestion, David. Maybe we should put a pin on this. It's possible
Yeah,
we'll know
that's what I
more
was saying.
about hiring in the next 2 to 4 weeks.
We don't know what Senate will bring.
Is Adam's hand still up, or?
I can ask him. No,
And maybe
Okay.
return to the question then of
Yeah, that would
like,
make
what's
sense.
the right number? Is it
'Cause I don't think we're
4?
gonna
Is
land
it
on it
3.5?
tonight.
yeah, and we might have better sense on, like I said, we've got a couple of candidates we're working with right now. We might have a better sense on, do we want to move forward with them?
Yeah,
So if we were going to move forward with those live applicants, they're not hypothetical, they're real people with
They're
names and
actual
addresses.
real people.
who will need health insurance?
That those people, if we proceed, what is the plausible date upon which they might be hired?
Probably, I mean,
By July.
I mean, within this fiscal year, yes, and I think within the next month or so, some of it depends on final decisions, background checks, take some time, leaving current agencies, things like that.
Background checks take how long for police?
Just
Just
for a
for
couple weeks or more, depending.
2 to 4, maybe?
I'd say that's a fair. I mean, hopefully we can do them a little quicker, but we want to be thorough. So, yeah, we should, hopefully know a little bit more about that by our next meeting in July or
Hopefully.
January. Excuse me. I know we're scheduled for the January 7th, follow-up on this.
So maybe we put a pin in this again and follow up on where are we with police hiring, and well, it will only be several weeks down the road if there actually is progress
Yeah.
between now and then, that
Mhm.
it may look different.
Yeah, we have a plan, so let's budget for it and put the pin in, as it becomes true or not true.
Patty?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think the quality of this discussion this whole night has just been really outstanding. I'm just so impressed that with all of this. But I guess I just want to make sure I'm hearing what I'm hearing. I'm hearing, Bart, I think that you're saying that as a town, we would like to have 4 officers. We've been budgeting for 4 officers, and we just haven't been able to get 4 officers. And if we wound up getting a 4th officer finally hired after July, that if we budgeted for 3.5 now, we'd probably have the money to have 4 officers. But what I'm hearing is that the goal is 4 officers. You just don't want to, you just don't want to keep on doing these vacancy savings because it just feels slimy. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that should be good news to the whole of Richmond, that we're hoping to maintain 4 officers, and it sounds like these officers that you've just interviewed could theoretically be on in July. So it's not such a big long thing as we're going to hire people in March or April or whatever. The process isn't months and months long. It's a 2-week background check. So that's all very encouraging to me, and I appreciate all the thought that's going into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Chief?
Of course, everything determines my collaboration with Josh, of course, but I believe that I would like to have the 2 of those positions filled before February, hopefully in January. I'm almost at 100% for that, and then we would work on that 4th position fairly quickly and way before July 1.
And shoot for before July. And of course, as observed, there are always the uncertainties of people come and go for various reasons. So at a given point in time, somebody could go in any position in any department.
I'm at us
Always true.
before the next budget year being at 100% that those positions will be filled. So
Kevin?
Yes, I'm just curious, if you budgeted for 3 and you got lucky and got your 4th person, what's the chances this group here could find the extra money somewhere in the budget to make that happen?
This year, I'd say it's.
This is next fiscal year.
Yeah, no, but just because of. I mean, if
I
you
will
want me to
just
take
tell
it,
you
I'd
my
rather
view.
you-
I in no way ever want to create a position that was not approved in a budget voted on by the voters. I just think it's bad form. I think our approach is we pass a budget and then we follow our budget. And you heard me talk earlier about the risks of just, oh, we'll throw in an extra position, we had some extra money, that builds a base. It is at least just one member of the select board. My
Right.
view is if we want 4, we budget 4.
Well, and to add to that, one of the ways we're gonna make this budget work at all is by basically robbing from our reserve fund. And the understanding that we have with ourselves is that when and if the FEMA money comes in, the first thing we repay is those reserve funds. And we don't know if after we've done that, how much we would have left. We might not have enough pocket change and other seat cushions to pay for this 4th position. I would
If we
agree.
don't budget for it.
Yeah, I would agree with, we should budget for it. And I honestly think we have heard briefings and executive sessions that we can't divulge, but I think we probably are in closer position to having a fully staffed department today than at any point since I've been on the board.
I think that's right.
And again, there's what we want, what we can budget for, and what life throws at us. We've intended to have a fully staffed police department, but market forces and things outside of our control have prevented that from happening.
But I think you raise valid points. I mean, I'm grateful for you two being here and for the people on the call, because when we talked about the budgeting process a few weeks ago, and I joked about there will be pie, didn't bring pie tonight, but this is the interaction we need. We don't want to be in an echo chamber where the only voices we're hearing are ourselves.
Yeah. And it's good to be challenged and, have our assumptions questioned, and we need the feedback. Okay.
Do we want to talk about, so we've talked about police quite a bit. We want to roll up and talk about, unless we're not done with police.
I think for the moment, we're good.
We're saturated.
What's that?
We're saturated with it.
So Jeff, the answer to your question is yes, Jay will be bringing pie to a future meeting.
So, but I guess maybe just.
You want our orders now?
How many decimal points?
Go ahead.
So just to give an overview of admin, we're budgeted right now in FY 25 for an assistant to the town manager at 30 hours. I came to the board in the end of this winter, early spring, because we saw a large increase in work related to the flooding. There was, actually, that was even before the 24 flood. So there was an ongoing FEMA claim for 23. We had emergency watershed protection program projects we were trying to move forward with, which were involved engineering and construction directly related from the flooding in 23. And we had a large number of home elevation projects that we were working forward with, as well as elevation. So those are some direct related to the flooding that we saw increases in a need for staffing. And then just in general increase, so the assistant to the town manager, you know, there's been, I think, an increase in demand for work on this building, support for committees, commissions, support with, you know, volunteer organization, recruitment, assistance with finance, assistance with grant management, assistance with requests for proposals for installations in the park as we continue to move forward with ARPA money. So the conversation in the spring was, well, we don't have it in the budget for 25. Maybe we do something temporary because some of these projects are temporary. So like the flooding, EWP projects, things like that. So we move forward with a temporary position that's at 25 hours per week. And it is budgeted through the end of this coming July, so that, or end of this coming June. And that is mostly focused on those EWP projects, the minutes from the Water Sewer Select Board, and the elevation home buyouts. What that then allowed was to free up some time so that Duncan, who's the assistant to the town manager, could then focus more on the FEMA projects. And we also got the second flood, so now there's a lot more, another FEMA project that we have to lump onto his plate to continue to work through. And as I look at what Duncan does now versus what we hired him for 2.5 years ago, a lot of it is the same tasks, but I just feel like there's been a large increase in the number of those tasks that we have to do. So that's where I was looking at initially proposing, you know, a deputy town manager and an assistant to the town manager, realizing where we're at with the budget. You know, I think if I could ask to basically create Duncan's position as a deputy town manager and increase it to 40 hours per week.
Anything in the chat?
I think that would allow him the extra time that we need right now that we're seeing with the admin demands. If that means not continuing the temporary position, I understand that. I think there would still be some things we have to kind of look at, like how do we better manage things? How do we allocate different resources, or what things do we not do? But I would like to advocate for at least that additional 10 hours and change in title.
For
Which
the
would add up to-
existing
For the
person.
existing, yes.
Which would add up to how many hours? 40?
So that would go from 30 to 40.
Yeah.
Yeah, and right now, just to give you an example, so since the flooding hit, like he always had a part-time thing that he was doing as well, and he said, look, you guys need me more than 30. So he's been diving in and helping out a lot more than 30 because the demands from FEMA are just like every day there's more reporting, more this, more that. He's extremely detail oriented, had all the spreadsheets done, and he does it so fast. But the level of work there is a lot, and then continuing to add in, you know, we look at from those FEMA, from the 23, actually from 23 storm, we have another road project that we're gonna need some help managing because we're gonna need Dugway Road to be repaired. That further got damaged in 24. Pete will definitely be integral in that, but Pete's also got a department to run, so we're gonna need to kind of help shepherd those projects along, as well as the class 4 road of Old Jericho Road, which we're working on repairing as well. We have some volunteer help on that, but we do need some staff support.
Josh,
I have my hand up first.
okay, you did, okay. Raise both fingers.
Last night, at the last night's select board meeting, someone went on at length about other towns don't have these positions and they seem to get by just fine, blah, 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 blah. And I submit to you that they don't get by just fine. There's a lot of work that's just flat out is not getting done in every town across the state that has a full town manager setup, even more is not getting done at the towns that just have select board members doing things. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of regulations that we have to follow, a lot of forms we have to fill out. And every time that we sit down and discuss with Josh his performance, one of the things we call him out on is, please stop sending us emails at 11 o'clock at night. You should be home in bed. And he's not doing that because he's trying to impress us with how dedicated and diligent he is. He's doing it because there's that much work to do. So I disagree with the people who say other towns are doing just fine. I don't think they are. I think we're the town that's being realistic about the amount of work that needs to be, that exists to be done, and we want to do it right, and not, if you'll pardon the expression, half-ass it, or just don't even do it.
Can I just wanna, before we get to add one thing to that.
Yeah.
Talking with Duncan a little bit more about it, he brings up a good point too, that other towns are structured differently, might have different staff, so some of those towns might have a rep person who helps out with some of the stuff that's falling on Duncan's plate is organizing of like requests for recreation and things like that, or chasing the RFP. So they might have a rep person that takes some of that, or they might have a public works director that could help, with some of the admin stuff that, that falls on Pete's plate, or some of the FEMA claims, quite honestly, if you have a public works director that kind of helps with some more of the administrative side of it. Whereas, Pete does a great job with that, but he's also managing his entire department as well. So just, those are just two positions that other towns might have that we're not factoring in when you look at
You're
what their
right.
staffing is.
But I also know from having, worked with you for several years now, there's enough work to get done that simply cannot be done by one town manager and a 30-hour-a-week person. It is what it is. If we want to do the best job we can for the citizens of this town, we need to make sure we have the right staff to do it. And so I think it does make sense to have an assistant town manager and an administrative assistant by whatever name.
Lisa?
All right, for employee X, I might argue that we don't need a full-time position. But when that employee X is Duncan, I've seen what he can do. And he's being hamstrung a little bit because he's not given full rope. He can take it, he can handle it, and he can do a really good job. And I think he will be empowered by us trusting him to do that, putting him in that kind of position. I think that will be very motivating for him.
Bart?
This is really a financial question. Does FEMA reimburse our staff for this kind of admin time?
Yes.
So where I'm going is, we used this phrase recently, there's an up and a down. So if it were an up, if we framed it temporarily, at least, up associated with FEMA workload that's going to be reimbursed by FEMA, it's an up in the budget, but maybe not an up in the ultimate tax rate down the road. If, because if FEMA's going to pay us back for all this time. That's where I'm going, because I'm a little stuck of this principle of how do we keep things level, stable funding. The exceptions seem to me when we have funding that supports additional hours, or for if we're not base building, for sort of one-time temporary or contract workers where you can dial it up and dial it down based on both the workload and the revenue supporting the workload. That's not as articulate as I wanted it to be, but I'm thinking that part of it is, for me, to what degree do we think those 10 hours are not an actual increased cost to the taxpayers because of FEMA, but an increased cost that's going to be paid by FEMA because of FEMA?
And then down the road, the floods we're likely to have every single year will continue to pay for those 10 hours.
That's a good thing. I got another question. For a lot of positions, you pretty much can define their job and they do it. For this job that you're talking about, there's a lot of different tasks that go into that job. And I think some of those should probably be charged out to recreation uses and become part of the project cost for, like Volunteers Green or Brown's Court. Duncan's spending time on those things. Then he's over here, where he's spending time helping Josh. Then he's over here helping time, or spending time helping with the website or debugging people's interfaces, whatever. If his timesheet should be filled out such that we can get a sense of, for the first time, of where his time is really going, and then we'll know.
I have a follow-up, and mine's narrower. Can we just tell how many hours a week he's putting into FEMA?
Well, that's might be all.
Yeah, I think so. Because that's one thing we track on every timesheet. We write down Okay, I spent 3 hours today on FEMA, so that way we can get reimbursed by FEMA. I will just note on that part, the reimbursement for administrative time is like the last thing you get from FEMA. So like every project has to be closed out. So not to go to the opposite side of this, but like, let's take for instance, the 23 projects. We've finished pretty much every single project except for Dugway Road, which is gonna take probably at least till next summer to get through. And Old Jericho Road, which is more of a footpath. But either way, those projects are probably gonna take another year. And then you close those out and then you get your administrative money, because then you submit all your admin time. So
Right.
it just, so I don't know that we can real time like add an offset into the FY 26 budget.
No, I understand.
Okay, I want to make sure that's where I thought you were going. I was like, I don't know that we can.
I'm really talking about long-term accounts receivable.
Yeah,
So we're spending more time on this. We're not getting paid this year or maybe even next year, but at some point, it's a cost that's going to be reimbursed to the taxpayers.
Yeah.
So I think in that regard, I'd like to know how many hours he's spending per week
Yeah, I
on
think
FEMA.
we can easily
Because
have that.
then it would seem to me, then I can contemplate an exception to this level funding
Okay.
of positions. Or if not, back to my base building, this doesn't make a difference for insurance. But if we truly think it's temporary because of FEMA, then I'd be inclined to say, well, let's dial it up and then dial it back down again post FEMA. If that's our core principle.
Pete?
So I always look at things a little bit different than most people, but flashback 2 years, okay?
2 years, 4
Business
floods
had-
ago.
2 floods ago. Oh, 5 floods ago. Let's be realistic. Business as usual in town. Each department had their items. We did our items. We had work plans. We stuck to our work plans. We roadside mowed. We did whatever our normal business was. We get nailed with the flood. Now, we're talking about one person. We're looking about increasing hours, but what the town doesn't understand, that spreads across Josh's desk. My workload is doubled, Connie's desk, and this is constant.
Yeah.
So the more Duncan can take off of our plate, he's not just servicing the town manager, helping the town manager. He's assisting me, he's assisting Connie, he's Connie's backup. It's critical. His position is critical. We have 2 meetings this Friday with FEMA. We're kicking off the 25 flood stuff. He's worked on those spreadsheets. He's got the DIS together. We're on a time crunch on stuff, and it's critical to have that person with that expertise. The quicker we get these claims in, the quicker we'll get our money. I'm hearing from a lot of smaller towns, they're hiring consultants.
Yeah.
Because they just can't take on the task.
First things the consultant has to do is go in and
So
learn the
they're
system.
spending that money up front, they're gonna get it back eventually, like Josh said, but we got this person in house. I think it's totally justified in my opinion, because he's helping all across the board, all administration. It's taking a lot of work off my plate, because this particular claim, me having 5 different contractors is so much over my head. Versus, the last claim where we did 95% ourselves.
Right.
So, it's a godsend to have them, and,
Josh, what it boils down to is how many baseball teams have a utility infielder? I know what he is.
I just want the town to understand that this impacts.
Sorry, was that not the only one?
That's all I can think of.
But I think back to Brock Holt of the Red Sox, who was a
So, yeah, I figured, yeah.
utility infielder, and that he could actually play every single position on the diamond. And
Exactly.
he was so critical to that team because he gave every guy a break. He filled in when they were injured. And so if you want to put it in baseball terms, I mean, like Pete's saying that Pete Duncan's our Brock Holt. Duncan, I think you know Brock Holt.
Thanks for the ultimate compliment. Yeah, that's great. That resonates for me. So thank you, everyone.
Now, he's great
You
to
named
work
the
with.
player who was named to the All-Star team specifically as a utility infielder.
The player who was named to the All-Star team as utility infielder.
That's
in this past year.
That's a
No,
tough one.
but it was in
Give me a year, I'll try.
Well,
2017.
oh,
Ender Inciarte of the Atlanta Braves was named
Okay.
specifically because he was
utility.
such a big asset utility infielder.
So I'd ask this, David, just because I'm trying to hold this line across all the departments, if there's a unique justification here associated with both FEMA workload and FEMA over the horizon revenue, that makes it much easier for me to support an increase of hours associated with this specific bolus of work. So I think for the next meeting, it would be great to get a sense of how many hours is it?
Yeah.
Because if it's 10 or more, it starts to get really easy to go from 30 to 40. Because that is in the future at no cost, essentially.
Okay.
And I just want to say again how commendable it is, and it's not lost on this board and this town, that as we've hit these disasters, everything has been handled in-house. And
That's a
you know,
good point.
the service is exceptional, and the roads were opened as quickly as possible, and fire department was out rescuing people, highway was out restoring roads, police department was out on calls, volunteers green was cleaned up, all in-house, which is a huge
Correct.
This year Duncan was out recording data from all the sites while I was working on roads where I had to do both.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's huge.
And
We're
you had to
already,
rescue,
we're already one step in the door with FEMA. We're, you know. Duncan's
you're
like,
rescuing water and sewer with a front end
Oh,
loader. He's
that was
sleeping,
last year.
he's sleeping on his
We'll
office
get reimbursed
floor.
faster.
Jumps
That
to the
wasn't
bad
Duncan
night.
driving.
No,
That was an educational night, I tell you.
That was a real discussion we had the next morning when we closed the door in the office. And you do what you gotta do. You got a better understanding of that stuff.
No, it was actually great to be with everybody.
And it was fun writing
To see
that
what
letter.
the
I was there too.
overnight response was like. It was impressive.
I'm just
No, I
gonna,
wasn't.
I think we have some direction on
Okay.
this.
and I'll just make another comment for comparison purposes. The recent Regional Planning Commission meeting, somebody from Huntington, they were interested in dealing with like the flooding they're having and mitigating the Huntington River.
Right.
They can't come up with the time to plan a $32,000 grant or come up with the money to fund a $32,000 grant. And so I'm just going, their bandwidth can't manage things that are really crucial to their town. If you think of where the Huntington River goes through Huntington.
Take the whole valley out.
So I'm not criticizing Huntington at all. I'm just saying that we have the perhaps luxury or benefit of being able to react to things in real time.
I think we have something to work on to come back.
Okay.
In a good direction. Do we want to talk or follow up on last night's discussion about fire?
About on-call.
Well, yeah, I mean, like,
Staffing.
do you want to look at like on call or I mean, I'm sure there's no numbers from, last night to tonight. But do we want to, or like, try to sharpen pencils on some numbers and come back with some ideas for the next budget meeting? I mean, one idea would be like, you could put a placeholder in of, hey, you got $20,000. We know the ideas aren't finalized now, but something to kind of work with, to give them a little something to plan with, to try to figure out whether it's a consultant or a change in pay, just to throw it out there to start the discussion.
I don't have those numbers, but Adam might, and I also see we have a hand up. That might.
Caitlin, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that a lot of the things that they brought up last night were great. And the sentiment that I was getting as they went through each of those things is that they're not really sure what will work or not work. So even when we said, we could certainly explore a stipend, well, there's some things that might not work with that. Or even if, we went the route of, paying more or whatever that is. All the pieces, it sounded like there was some concern in each direction. I do really, again, feel like we need to do an overall needs assessment to figure out what the best track just overall for all the pieces of the fire department is, so that we can service them the best. Maybe it is a stipend. And I think we could do a needs assessment pretty, at a pretty low cost to get a first set in and then understand what comes next. You could also do a consultant from there, but I think a needs assessment would be a good first step.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, what I was trying to think is if there's a set amount of money for 26 that could go towards needs assessment, go towards consultant, like, it was just sort of give a little bit of seed money
$30,000.
essentially. 20, 30, well, I don't know what the right number is.
I'm just saying that here's a number to plug in, $30,000.
Guys? Thoughts, questions?
No, I sent an email to Adam and Dennis today, and we had a little conversation outdoors yesterday, and the members that are on the fire department, I really find it hard for them to commit to doing the on-call from 6 to 6 because of everybody's lifestyle. They have work the next day, they have children, their wives. It might be great for some of the older guys, but what you're looking for is 3 people. You need a truck driver who can also run the pump.
I can do that.
Yeah,
There you go.
and you need 2 SCBA qualified people.
I can't do that.
You could qualify.
Connie?
That's what you're looking for is a minimum amount per night. And a lot of guys said, oh yeah, I'd still get up and come, but that's the core, that's not gonna be here in 5 years.
Yeah.
I can even bring my own fire truck.
Well, long story short, Jerry, we want to do what we can with the options we've got available. And there were a lot of things, I mean, having an open house.
Yeah.
And publicizing more in Front Shore Forum, these are things that don't cost much money, but if doing a study would help, you know, that's where some of this money would go as well. And so we want to make sure that we're not leaving any stones unturned, because we're at that point. You made a very good case last night. We're hosed if we don't get some change.
Art?
You know, I'm struck at the parallels between this and our discussion earlier about Southview. What do we budget? Because we don't know what the plan's going to look like. So in a parallel fashion, I think what we want is a plan. Like, what do we think would work to improve staffing, membership, and showing up for calls? That seems to me like a contract consultant kind of thing.
Exactly.
Where are we? Where do we want to go? How do we get there?
Somebody who has done this.
Similar to the engineering plan, like how much is it going to cost? What do we need to do? We don't know until we get to somebody to look at it. So that's what I would recommend, somebody to look at it with the fire department membership about where are we, what are the challenges, and how do we address them. And I used this term, I think yesterday, about what are the evidence-based practices? What do we think works? I mean, at one point in human history, bloodletting was really popular.
And leeches.
And it had the feature of we're
That's
doing
medical
something,
practice.
it just had the feature of not doing something that was very effective.
Well, you know, too, let's free these guys up to do what they do.
Yeah.
Get a consultant to sit there and, you know, come up with scenarios that drawing on past experience that they've had, then put all the minds together, and it'll be a pretty good plan. So,
Caitlin?
Yeah, I'm just gonna agree with that and to I wouldn't have maybe made the blood statement in comparison, but that's a good one of, you know, the what was to what is, and I'm laughing about that. But I think that there is what I saw last night and what you know, we're putting out as proposals there, you know, maybe it would work, but we don't necessarily know if that's just a Band-Aid or if it's really going to fix a thing. And I think that we all want to invest in our fire department in the best way that we can. And to have a consultant come in and really help us do that effectively without, you know, making shots in the dark of what we could do or things that we could try could really set us up for future success in how we see the department continue to grow.
Thank you. Connie?
I'm gonna ruin the atmosphere here, guys. Cause I've been doing nothing but staring at L15 on the revenue page for 2 months now. And we were tasked 3 budget meetings ago to try to get us down to 3.5%. We're at 7.95%, and we're gonna be coming back with additional things. If we look at fire, if we look at the admin position, and if that missing FEMA invoice comes in, that could be at least 100,000. So the unassigned.
Got confirmation there's another invoice coming. He just texted.
How much?
He didn't say how much.
I'm guessing 100,000.
I don't believe it's that much, but.
At any rate, whatever it is, that unassigned fund number is gonna go less than what it is. And I'm looking at this saying, it's December 17th. We're definitely not going down, and we're looking at going up.
I have a suggestion. Where are we with the different fire reserves and fire reserve investments, or?
There's, Josh and I went through them. There's like nowhere to go.
I mean, the only other one that we could, yeah, I think we can take another look, but we've taken a lot of looks, but you never know. The only other one that I know I brought up last time was highway equipment reserve, if we took another 35 out of that, it would go to a negative balance in FY 27. So we could get through 26 with the highway purchases, but we'd have to make sure we funded it for 27.
I was really going specifically to fire though, like if the fire department needs a consultant, is there reserve sitting somewhere and we're gonna tap that because it's fire?
I would think if we're specifically looking at equipment, we could use the capital equipment reserve for fire. If we're gonna use a consultant to look at like, how many vehicles should we have? How much safety equipment should we have?
Well, it'd be staffing and I don't.
Yeah, that's kind of a stretch. perhaps.
Well, but one of the issues brought up tonight was, do we need
How many vehicles?
that
Yeah.
fourth vehicle? So that's why I'm saying that.
It's related.
It could be part of the study.
Piggybacking on this.
It's a thought.
Otherwise, I don't see anywhere we could use, because the only fire reserves are, wait, what about fire impact fees? Could we use that to do a study?
What do
That's
we
about
got?
growth.
What do we got?
It has to do with growth of the town,
What's the revenue look like?
not that much. What's that, let's look at the budget sheet and see what the reserve says
At the
for
list of
that.
at the risk of stupidly complicating things, do you think Bolton would be interested in piggybacking on a study?
The only thing I'll say about Bolton is I think they're in worse shape than us right now, budget
are.
and FEMA expense wise. I'd be hard pressed to
They're
ask
very,
them for
very
any
tough
money.
financial.
Yeah, they're gonna be in.
Just had a bond vote tonight.
We're looking at-
2 million and another million borrowed money.
The well is dry.
We are looking at a double-digit municipal tax increase
It's,
in Bolton.
it's pretty.
So what do we think as you're hunting down the,
Fire impact fees are currently, I'll share this so we can all,
33,000.
yeah, it's
Oh.
33,000. Wait,
it's
we gotta look at what are the restrictions on fire impact fees though? Let's look at it. 'Cause
So how about this, between now and the next time, contemplate that, because if that could be used, it seems like an easier conversation to have.
Yeah.
It's an easier sell. It's related.
Well, if not that, Josh, if we said we couldn't use the fire impact fees for that, I think we could use the fire impact fees.
For a truck.
Part of the capital plan in the fire is for a new addition down the road.
Yeah.
Which would lessen the reserve money we have to
Could go
raise.
to a truck, yeah.
And we could take what we lessen the reserve.
So maybe this is a task, another pin in this, like, can we find rounded off 30,000-ish from an appropriate reserve fund for this fire department initiative? And do it without having to ask the taxpayers to pay for it next year in real taxes, real time.
I think we could swing something with that impact fee reserve.
Caitlin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that also just to remind us, $30,000 was like a throw out there. So if we could get an idea of how much this might cost, if we were to bring in a consultant, then we could maybe get something more realistic that might be less. And so then we're budgeting less from, wherever it is.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, so that would, just to be clear, for our purchasing rules, we'd be putting out some form of RFP and looking for bid submissions. So is the statement of work and promulgating it and trying to not only post it, but send it to the right people. So there's a little time to get to a point where not only we have a statement of work, but an actual budget. And that's probably a couple of months out if we thought of it that way.
Yeah, I wonder is there any like chief listserv that you could email out
That's
to
what I was
and
thinking.
ask if anybody's done this just to get a ballpark?
Yeah, we could
Number.
ask on meeting that.
Yeah, like, does anybody, we could ask there, like, or do you guys have like?
Or we could have
chief
the
list?
fire what's the name of the industry group, the fire?
Certain industry group?
NFPA?
There you go.
National Fire, yeah.
Yeah.
Ask an FPA.
We can, okay, so let's see if we can reach out. If you guys can do some reaching out, we can ask some other towns, we can ask VLCT. Maybe somebody's got a study that they've done and we can get a
I'm
ballpark on
wondering
the
if
number.
VLCT would have that.
Yeah,
They
so
should.
let's do some digging.
Yeah, really been asked. Caitlin, go ahead.
My dad has actually done these several times, and so I can also ask him what the typical fee is for this and send that to whoever makes sense.
Yeah, Caitlin, my email is on the website under the town manager page. If you wanted to send it right to me.
Will
happy
do.
to Any other information you've got, that'd be helpful.
One benefit we have, David, is it's a small town with one station. I mean, if you're gonna do it like, I don't know how many stations there are in like Burlington, a handful. And there's more of a hierarchy, so yeah, I think in some ways this is a pretty straightforward question for a volunteer fire department with
Yeah.
one station and one set of vehicles.
The sound is bad.
Aaron, go ahead.
Hey, I was just wondering if there could be possibly a grant or something to help pay for such a study.
We can check. Jeff, go ahead. I only called on Aaron first because I didn't know if she was needing to tell us something about sound.
That's okay. You didn't hurt my feelings. Heinsberg just did a public safety study last year. It took them a while. It cost considerably more than this, but they were looking at fire, police, and rescue. And
For a copy of that?
and maybe, their fire department used to be not so different than ours. So under that study, you might just read that study and see what its recommendations were. My recollection was, if you're looking for savings, to reduce costs, sometimes these studies don't accomplish that goal. Sometimes they ask for more than what you'd hoped. But, it would be at least worth reading Heinsberg's study because they're a very similar town except for the interstate.
Yeah. Bart?
David, I remember we saw the draft. I'm not sure we ever saw a final, and
It's
because
done. It's on their website.
it was a bunch of different things, my memory of it was that it was not as useful as I might have hoped it would be. But maybe that was just the draft. And I think here, if we're trying to get this done faster, the scope is probably different. If I recall correctly, that was in the neighborhood of 100,000 across all services. And we're talking a narrower scope. I don't think we're ready to spend 100,000.
No.
And I would also say, I don't think we're looking for cost savings. We spend a fair amount of money on equipment.
We're looking
and
for
very little
recruitment
on
first and
staff.
foremost.
Yeah. We're looking for like this specific thing. How do we get more staff, more volunteers? I'll say it's not lost on us that Heinsberg, after that report came out, invested in the neighborhood of $200,000 in fire department staff.
Yeah, really. But I read that study looking at the police department because that's the section that I was interested in. I didn't look that closely at the fire, and maybe just the fire chapter. At least it might be relevant.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
good point.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sorry, paid for it too.
Do we have anything in the chat? Went from 9 to 13.
Oh, geez. Nothing much recent. Oh,
You guys going through the chat to see what we
At
may
one
have missed?
point, we were discussing how to catapult pies.
I
Flying
think
pies?
it's trebuchet.
Well, yeah,
Is that how frisbees were invented?
I don't think a ballista would work as well.
Okay.
Retro rockets.
Anything else?
Well,
Patty, go ahead.
I know you probably don't want more to do, but Bard was saying that I think earlier in the evening that that he is suggesting. I think you suggested, Bard, that the select board or a member from the select board meet with the Heinsberg select board at least quarterly. Did you say that earlier?
Yeah, that was at the very beginning. I did.
Yeah. And so one of the things I was thinking is that if we really do relationship building with Heinsberg, we now have rescue services together. We have police services that are almost together. And maybe we could have some fire cooperation in terms of I don't know, different kinds of services that we could maybe share, either, in terms of equipment and or staffing or training, or, it seems like if we really kind of build the trust and build these relationships, this is potentially the creative way that we get more services, like with the police, we're getting more services because we have theoretically would have 8 officers, 4 and 4, to, give us a lot more coverage. And the same could be true with fire as well. It'd be kind of interesting if the whole public safety thing was connected with Heinsberg. So just the thought.
Thank you, Patty. Bard?
So it's, I'll say people have been talking about regionalization in Vermont across towns for apparently close to 50 years with very sparse success. And we are actually held up as an example that has achieved some modest success in policing across 2 towns. And it sounds kind of odd to say it perhaps, but it is like unusual progress because it doesn't always happen. And so across the 2 towns, roughly 10,000 people, I've pondered for a long time, like, how many training officers do we need over how many staff? How many, like, inventory management systems do we need? That there is a potential, I think, as you imply, an economy of scale in things, but observation would suggest that this stuff happens slowly, but like, as in many journeys, perhaps the most important step is the first one.
Yeah.
Grasshopper.
Anything else tonight? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and for the spirited discussion. We've
Chairman,
made some progress. Thank you, Jay.
Bart, I'll second that.
Thank you, Bard. Calling for a vote on adjournment.
Lisa, aye.
Bart, aye.
David, aye. Guess we can go without Adam's vote.
Adam is yelling at his kids.
Thank you, Caitlin.
He's trying to put him to bed.
Good night, everyone.